The story begins on a day that was ordinary and peaceful like any other. As the sun shines brightly over the city, we see different people happily trading items with one another. Elsewhere, a guy with spiky brown hair is enjoying some music from his earbuds as he walks along the street. But then, all of a sudden, a powerful bright blue laser beam blasts the floor right in front of him. Like any normal person, he's confused. But before he can understand what's happening, the blast becomes stronger, causing a massive gust of wind to blow him and all the other pedestrians away. Everyone starts to panic when they see the catastrophe that's about to befall them, and they start to wonder if it's an earthquake or a terrorist attack. But even though it isn't clear what's happening, it slowly becomes obvious that this is their last peaceful day ever. A massive blue-tinted dome surrounds a small part of the city with a few people trapped inside. Immediately after that, the ground starts to rise, and it lifts its enclosed portion like some kind of pillar that's growing up all the way to the sky. As they get high up into the clouds, all the people inside the dome panic even more, wondering what on earth could be happening. One of them even sits on the floor because his head starts to hurt from it, while others still talk among themselves and theorize what they could be experiencing. But while those guys are way off with their assumptions, the guy with spiky hair from earlier suspects that they might actually be experiencing dimensional transportation to another world. He remembers that he always read about the topic in web novels and webtoons, so he's pretty surprised that such a thing is happening to them in real life too. While he's still thinking about that, several tabs suddenly pop up in front of him and everyone else. When they pay attention, they're informed that the game has begun and that it's time for each player to throw their dice. Apart from the fact that he finds the face on the tab annoying, he wonders what it could mean by games and dice. But while he's thinking about that, he's interrupted once again when a lady points up to the sky and yells for everyone to take cover. A wave of horror washes over the terrified people as they look up and see a massive object crashing down toward them. They all wonder what it could be, and while nobody else can come up with anything, Mr. Handsome Guy suddenly realizes that the massive object is actually a gigantic dice. The dice lands on top of the cube-like dome, and although it doesn't hurt anyone, the impact causes another tab to pop up. The tab then informs everyone that they're currently in pawn number 8, which is now going to move 3 paces. That's when we see that the cube has a giant number 3 written on it, and the massive pillar supporting that portion of the city also has a huge number 8 written on it. This pillar happens to be the pawn, and just like the game informed them, it starts to move till it completes the 3-pace move. The move isn't slow either, and the speed causes the people inside the dome to panic even more than they did before because of how terrified they are to see their city moving like a chess piece. At this point, it becomes clear to the guy with the spiky hair that they've been summoned to a game. But it's not any regular game because instead of being the players, all of them are actually just the pawns. The city stops moving, and when he notices this, he assumes that the being playing the game is the one who threw the dice earlier. So he concludes that the pawn is actually the entire city and not even the people living inside it. Now, it's clear to him that the player chose this city as a pawn, but he wonders why the player playing the game had to summon the people along with it when he could have just taken only the city. Once again, he's drawn out of his thoughts when another notification from the tab distracts him. He takes a closer look and reads the announcement message, stating that they've arrived at a defense space, and on top of that, the difficulty in defense time is being set before the final message, which is a prompt to throw another dice. Not long after that, the difficulty level is revealed to be at level 1, and the defense time is set at 3 days. So, after this announcement, the game starts summoning the map. Before the people can even digest all that information, another pawn appears close to theirs, revealing a mountain forest beside their city. They're all shocked to see that the ground came up again, and the confusion only gets worse. But at that moment, another tab pops up, informing them that the defense mission will soon begin. For this mission, if all 4 bases are destroyed, it will count as game over. And if that happens, then the pawn will die. After receiving this kind of information, the people start to panic out of fear for their lives because they don't know what will happen to them if the pawn dies. Some of them even start banging on the transparent barrier, crying and asking to be taken back home. But as you can imagine, that's not how the game works, so they're stuck with no option but to play. Mr. Handsome sees the commotion and finally takes off his earbuds for the first time since the beginning of the story. He knows that there's no need to scream and try to reach out to the game masters because he feels that if communication was necessary, then they would have talked to them from the start. As another tab reveals that the citizens will be provided with equipment, he concludes that the best thing they can do for themselves at the moment is to focus on the very frequent announcements. After that, they're instructed to throw their dice. The main character picks up the dice he was provided with, and notices that it has 100 faces. But while he's still trying to figure it out, he's distracted by someone who yells out to them that something is approaching from the forest on the other side of the barrier. Everyone takes a closer look, trying to guess what it is, and after a short while, they realize that it's not some cavalry or rescue team, but instead, it's a huge army of monsters running toward their city. It doesn't take long before they reach them, and when that happens, the barrier doesn't hold the monsters back at all. Every one of the citizens starts running for their lives. Most of them aren't fast enough to outrun the huge beasts, so many of them get killed along the way. Among them he also tries to escape just like everyone else, but even though he's faster than most, one of the monsters catches up to him and whacks him with a gigantic club. The force of the smash sends him flying, and we see that it even gives him a sharp cut on his forehead. But while he's in the air and about to crash, he suddenly realizes that the reason why humans were needed for the game is that the pawns need to be protected from the monsters. He eventually crashes to the floor, and even though he's hurt, the thought remains in his mind as he concludes that the people need to protect their city because it is now the pawn, and they need to do anything to move it closer to its ultimate goal. As a result, he describes this strange and unexpected series of events as a dice game that's probably being played by demons or gods. The ogre that hit him just stands there with the wooden club covered in blood, waiting for him to get up from the stack of cardboard boxes that broke his fall. All of a sudden, a woman with wings flies out of nowhere and buries her spear into the ground, causing a huge firestorm to ensue. The monsters are immediately terrified and try to run away, but the inferno is so huge that it quickly consumes them before they can escape. Some of the civilians who were trying to run turn around to see the massive tornado of fire, and they're dumbfounded by such a powerful display. But more importantly, they're relieved because the monsters that were chasing them were all killed in the fire. The flames finally die out, and the woman responsible reveals herself, so all the people around curiously wonder who this mysterious and timely savior is. That's about the time when a tab appears above her head to inform us that this white-haired girl is actually Hayeju, a level 1 player who's just an ordinary citizen by class. It's difficult to imagine an ordinary citizen having that much power, but when the weapon she's using is revealed to be a legendary class spear, it suddenly makes a lot of sense. It turns out that she's wielding the empirical flame dragon prominence as canine, and it allows her to borrow the power of the empirical flame dragon. Everyone is still staring at her in awe when she suddenly tells all the injured people to run down to the Namsan Tower where the police and military are forming a defense line. That's some pretty good news. But the most important thing she says is that everyone should roll their dice as soon as possible. Even though everyone is holding their dice in their hands, they don't really understand its use, probably because it doesn't look like a regular dice at all. But Hayeju explains that if they roll their dice, the object will turn into equipment according to the number they roll. Hearing this, they toss their dice, and as they do, the white-haired savior tells them to fall back if they get ordinary class equipment. However, those who get above magical class equipment are requested to join her in her battle against the monsters. The people start to receive their weapons, and even though they're still confused, they admit that it's exactly as the girl had said. After most of them get their weapons, she leads the way to fight the monsters, and all those with higher class weapons become more motivated to help her, and keep doing as she says. They all raise their weapons and begin to take on the invading beasts. Even though most of them had never wielded such dangerous objects before. It was on that day that they lost their ordinary lives and began living extraordinary ones instead. Despite their bravery and courage on the first day of the new year, countless people died fighting at the hands of the monsters. But at least out of this bloody conflict of fantasy, heroes were born to protect this world. We see our hero is still lying in the stack of boxes, and it turns out that his name is actually Choi Yul, a level 1 player who's also an ordinary class citizen. With his dice still in his hand, he just lies there as if he's unconscious. But then suddenly he drops the die, and it rolls just like everyone else's. But unlike any of them, he lands on the highest number of 100, and just like that, Choi Yul becomes the strongest human player in the entire 8th pawn. But unfortunately it isn't that obvious because he's soon to be called the worst ever garbage by others in the game. We see that unlike other players who had lower numbers on their dice, our hero doesn't get a weapon. Instead, he gets a book which contains a magical text. The Demon King of Sovereignty, Krasina's book, which also happens to be a mythical class object. This book grants him permission to use the library of the Demon King Krasina, who desires everything and anything the world has to offer. It also allows the user to look at all kinds of information, such as item location, hidden events, monster information, or even the map and goal when a new mission begins. However, Krasina is a reincarnation of monopolistic desire, so all the rewards that the survivors earn from the knowledge in his text will go to the owner of Krasina's book. In other words, our hero might have the most insane power of all because he gets to keep all the rewards of anyone who uses the book's knowledge. The scene shifts and it's been 3 hours since the defense mission began. But within that short time, they have already lost 3,102 citizens to the cold hands of death. 723 of them have also sustained injuries. And to make matters worse, one of the 4 bases has been destroyed. Regardless of the discouraging stats, Hayeju continues to fight using her powerful firestorm to fry monsters left and right. So after a long and difficult battle with her team, they finally eliminate all the enemies. After she confirms that the fight is over, momentarily, the citizens who helped her start to rejoice, glad that they survived and won. While some of them even start to think that the white-haired warrior is a goddess. The celebrations are interrupted when several army trucks suddenly come speeding into the scene, and as the soldiers come out like they're raiding the place, they inform the civilians that they're the Korean army who have come to evacuate them to the Namsun Tower. As some of the soldiers help the injured people into the trucks, one of them goes to meet Hayeju to commend her for her efforts. She humbly waves off the praise. And that's when we see that this soldier is actually Kon Jae-young, a level 1 ordinary citizen who has the title of Cult Inquisitor because his weapon is a hero rank helmet. It's called the Helden's Helmet, and it gives him iron faith that prevents him from falling into a state of confusion, fear, or bewilderment. Hayeju asks Kon if the mission is over now, but he explains that it's difficult to say exactly what the situation is because the internet and phone calls are no longer working. Because of this, the soldiers are using shortwave radios to establish communication, and Kon is hopeful that they'll soon receive situation reports from other parts of the city. After explaining this to her, he suggests that they head down to Namsun Tower right away. The girl agrees, but all of a sudden, someone shouts for them not to leave. And we see that it's our hero Choi Yul with his book open. He reads out, telling them that the fight isn't over yet. And the reason he says this is because the boss monster is going to arrive soon. Even though he's losing a lot of blood from the wound on his head, he doesn't seem to mind because he can see everything written in the book. He flips through the pages with laser-sharp focus, revealing that he can see everything from the mission information to the monster data, and even the current progress state. To make his point clear, he turns the book to face Kon and Hayeju. But surprisingly, when they look at the book, all they see are blank pages. They explain this to Choi Yul, which of course shocks him to his bones. The white-haired lady asks Kon if it's a manual that only Choi Yul can see, but the soldier just suggests that maybe it's a collection of data. This is when our hero finally realizes that he's the only person who can see the text in the book. Even though Kon doesn't say much, he stares at the spiky-haired dude and starts to think about the overwhelming potential of the book because information is the same as power. All of a sudden, the soldier asks our hero to give them more information because he needs proof of the contents of the book. Choi Yul is more than happy to. He immediately begins explaining that Helden's Helmet is a hero rank helmet and a part of a 6-item set. He even goes on to reveal that the user of the identity is Sergeant Kon Jae-young and that he has 21 days left until he's discharged. Kon is stunned upon listening to him, but what he's most concerned about is the fact that he didn't know that the helmet came in a set. After our hero breaks everything about his weapon down, he moves on to talk about Go Haiju's weapon. He immediately tells her that she's using a legendary rank weapon called the Empirical Flame Dragon Prominence's Canine. But he doesn't stop there, and when he reveals that her favorite karaoke song is Chogap Mountain, the girl gets embarrassed and screams for him to stop because he's made his point clear. Hayeju knows that she didn't tell anyone that secret, so she concludes that the book must be real for it to even have such accurate personal information. Kon also agrees with her, reiterating that it must really be a data book. After confirming that it's legit, the sergeant concludes that the boss monster is also coming since Choi Yul saw it in the book. So he decides to contact headquarters for support against the enemy. However, they'd have to wait a while before the reinforcements arrive, so they all agree to wait. And in the meantime, the scene shifts, and we see a man talking about how he occasionally thinks that he might be a bug character ever since their world turned out to be a game. He talks about how this world's problems are too easy for him and believes that his creators made him the way he is so that he can't go out into the world. He's a young man with a bandage on his head, sitting inside a room in his hospital uniform. And most importantly, there are several mind-puzzling games around him, from chess to card games and even a Rubik's Cube. After seeing all of this, it's easy to imagine that this guy is probably intellectually superior to most other people. It turns out that this patient strongly desires to go out into the world, but it seems like the operators found a bug inside him, forcing him to stay inside. Meanwhile, back in the game, we catch up with our hero and see him being drawn out of his thoughts again, this time by Kon, who's calling him to inform that he has received permission from HQ. The sergeant admits that it's a gamble for them, but they've decided to trust Choi Yul's data because they don't have another plan, and they certainly don't have much time either. After telling him this, Kon hands him the command radio and asks him to provide the most information about the monster along with the best countermeasures possible. Our hero takes the phone and agrees to do what he's been asked. Before explaining the plan to the other soldiers over the radio, Choi Yul does a mic test to ensure that they can hear him because henceforth he'll be talking only about the defense mission. After making that clear, he proceeds to inform them that this is a defense mission where they need to protect the base from the wave of monsters that appear every 6 hours, and at the end of each wave, a wave boss arrives. The first one they'll be facing is a twin-headed ogre. It is a level 1 difficulty monster that can be defeated using close combat and magic simultaneously. Choi Yul then explains that they can only win if they protect the base 4 times a day, 12 times in 3 days, and defeat the wave boss. With all the info at his disposal, he suggests that they strategize together because if they do, then they'll definitely survive. Our hero claims that after winning the defense mission, he'll look for a way for them to go back home. But as an audience we all know that's not gonna happen in next 2 to 3 years since studio and author needs money to survive. So, they will make those humans suffer for a very long time. And when Go Hayeju hears this, she's surprised that he's also planning what would happen after the mission. Choi Yul finishes his talk with the HQ and tells them that he'll begin telling them all the information they'll need. However, when he's about to do that, he doesn't realize that he should have double-checked the item information on the Book of Krasina. Because it turns out that what he didn't see while he was unconscious is the fact that the book monopolizes all the rewards from those with whom the information was shared. The moment he starts talking, a creature in another realm takes out an insanely long scroll and begins writing down the names of every single person who hears what Choi Yul said, both directly and indirectly. The reason for this is that, unfortunately, the scope of the words shared covers a whole lot. So it basically means that even those who didn't get direct information from our hero would also have their rewards taken away from him, including those who heard the information as rumors. In simple word, it's like COVID, spreading as it wishes. Our hero just gang-banged everyone with his lack of knowledge. Soon enough, the wave boss arrives, and it immediately goes on a rampage. But thankfully, they have a plan to deal with it, and so the players start containing the monster immediately. The soldiers unleash a barrage of bullets on the twin-headed ogre and Go Hayeju uses her spear to attack it as well, while Choi Yul reads the book like a mage so he can tell them what to do next. The white-haired warrior uses her signature move to start another firestorm to engulf the wave boss, and she succeeds by using the flames to slash the monster. But then something strange happens. All of a sudden, and for some reason, her white hair suddenly changes to the color of her flames. This confuses her, but Choi Yul just gives her a thumbs up to inform her that she's cleared the first wave already. Realizing that they've won, she casually returns the gesture, not minding if her hair color changed. While they celebrate their little win, the greedy demon god of sovereignty awakes from his slumber. He looks down at the city standing on pawn number 8 to confirm that it has a total population of over 193,000 people. Krasina's 3 eyes become wide open when it's confirmed that the recorded sacrifices of sovereignty are over 170,000. A wide smile appears on the demon god's face when he realizes that 91% of the population were recorded as sacrifices in a single day. And while this is good news for Krasina, it's certainly not for the people of the city. It turns out that the names of all the people who had Choi Yul's information or knowledge in one way or the other were written in the data book. From the moment he started revealing his plan, as a result, all those names that were continuously pasted in the book throughout the fight against the wave boss were also instantly sucked out of the book directly to the demon god who accepted them as sacrifices. On the other hand, he had no idea he was feeding the demon god, and by the time he found out, it was already too late because that was the beginning of his sins which would continue until the last moment of the game. The city's defense mission is something like a tower defense game because it involves monsters moving towards the bases that they want to destroy. This then requires the players to produce forces to stop the enemies. The scene shifts back to the city that has now become a huge battlefield, and there we see that another wave of monsters has arrived. In this situation, there's only one man who can lead them to victory, and that's Choi Yul. With the responsibility now on his shoulders, he reads from the demonic book and tells the soldiers to fire at the monsters with long-range weapons that can attack over a wide area. The military and all the citizens follow his orders and unleash a barrage of missiles and bullets on the ogres from above. They all use their newly acquired weapons to defend themselves by shooting at the monsters from the top of the skyscrapers in the city. However, the plan is a lot more complex than just blasting away at the enemies. Because while the first weapons cooled down, a second wave of long-range attacks is initiated. The ogres don't stand a chance against the heavy rain of explosives, magical blasts, and bullets. So all they can do is scream in agony as the attacks rip them apart. As the onslaught continues, Choi Yul reveals that the monsters of difficulty level 1 is pretty dumb, so he concludes that his side can lure them into the trap they've set before ambushing them. Meanwhile, the soldiers and warriors at ground level decide that their barrage is too light, even though it almost looks like a hellscape down there. With this in mind, they agree that they're not going to spare any ammo so that they can throw everything they've got at the monsters. Our protagonist's master plan for this particular wave of monsters is to injure them so badly that they have no choice but to split up. When that happens, they'll set up different squadrons and parties of warriors using higher-level weapons to finish them off for good. The plan seems to be going well, and we see our spiky-haired hero reading the information from Krasina's book to the other fighters. He instructs them to maintain the status quo at the locations where they need more people. It turns out that this demonic book is so impressive that it actually updates all the information in real time, which means that literally everything that's happening at that moment is actually being recorded in the book at the same time it occurs. Also, just by thinking about the information he wants to see in the book, he can simply flip over a page to see what he's looking for. It's almost like he wants to use the book to see the future, but even though he's not sure it will work, he has to try at least. Choi attempts to achieve this, and as he keeps reading, he's able to provide better info to help his side. He tells one of the soldiers to stand at a particular spot because he already knows what's going to happen. He can even tell which equipment will be better for long-range support, and he can also tell from when and where the monsters will be coming from. With all of this new and timely info, Choi Yul starts to believe that all of them can actually survive this game. While Choi does the work behind the scenes, we join the soldiers holding the fort outside and find out that the third squad led by the sergeant has completed their part of the mission. So he informs his men, and they decide to report the situation back to Choi Yul. However, when Cone hears this, he doesn't seem too pleased about it. He recalls how the commanding headquarters initially had the final say after he suggested using the book, but now he feels like the entire mission has been taken over. One of his subordinates starts reporting the situation back to Choi Yul, while Cone just stands there feeling pissed off, not really able to say anything. He's deep in thought as he remembers what Choi Yul said about the book, and how there's only a lot of data inside it. It makes him wonder if the hero's ability to read the book is the only thing that gives him authority to command the entire city, or if the demonic book is actually the reason for his sudden ability to control everyone's actions. The sergeant's trail of thought is interrupted when the person on his mind calls out to him. He asks Choi Yul what he wants, and our friendly hero just assures him that their fight against the wave is almost over. Kon is alarmed to hear this, so he asks if the last wave's boss is coming. He confirms his doubts. However, he seems extremely chill about it, telling the sergeant not to worry about anything. But as you'd expect, Kon can't just pretend like it's not a big deal. He's perplexed by Choi Yul's attitude toward facing the last wave boss, but our guy just keeps assuring him that Hayeju will defeat the monster in one go. Kon gets even more uncomfortable when he sees Hayeju sleep in a corner, as if they're not in the middle of an actual war. It becomes obvious that she isn't even prepared when she wakes up, looking surprised that she'll have to face the last wave boss. Just as Kon feared, the last beast looks like he's no pushover because this time they'll be going up against a gigantic stone monster called Billy the Giant. However, we quickly realize that this huge monster only has a difficulty level of 1. On top of that, he was born weak and abandoned by his kind, so he lacks in combat power, even though he's very large in size. We see the rock monster chasing after he and his companions who are trying to evade it in a truck. All of a sudden, Choi Yul informs Hayeju that she's up next for the fight, but the girl just complains about how he didn't wake her up on time. She's not prepared, and to make matters worse, Kon announces that they've run out of flares. After blasting the wave boss with the last flare, they try to escape by speeding up the truck, but the giant doesn't slow down either. It follows them, attempting to smash the truck at every chance it gets. But the driver proves to be very skillful by swerving out of the way each time. The trio sitting at the back of the truck has no choice but to endure the bumpy ride, and even though Hayeju preferred to be somewhere else, Choi Yul explains that the reason they're out on the off-road terrain is so that the city doesn't get destroyed. The hero knows that the city and its bases will be destroyed in a heartbeat if such a massive creature gets in, so they have to fight the giant monster outside. Eventually, they manage to pull away from the beast, and Choi Yul explains that the monster has a relatively low movement speed. Another relieving fact is that it also doesn't have any resistance against any element. So he believes that they can win if they just rain down a barrage of attacks on it. The giant eventually tires out and decides to take a seat on the floor. That's when the trio parks the truck at a distance before getting off to attack. On the way back to face Billy the Giant, Hayeju points out that raining down an attack doesn't seem very plausible because they're the only ones around. But Choy explains that they're not the ones who will be unleashing the powerful attacks. Just when you think he's about to say something to relieve her, he tells Hayeju that she's the only one who will be fighting the wave boss. Hearing this, she's very shocked at first. But by then, it's already too late to make any changes to the plan because they're already just a few feet away from the giant. So she accepts the responsibility and, as she prepares for the fight, she asks him what she has to do to win. As usual, Choi Yul casually looks into Krasina's book and informs her that there is a hidden feature in items that are above heroic rank. He explains that if she can fulfill certain conditions, then the shape of her weapon will change, and if that doesn't happen, then a hidden skill will be activated. Hayeju and the sergeant just stare at Choi Yul in confusion because they don't really get what he's talking about. So Choi decides to break the concept down by further explaining that, in order to figure out the hidden features, they'll have to fulfill the 3 conditions listed. However, unlike other people, Choi has a rare item that actually tells him all the mysterious conditions for every item in the game. The scene shifts, and we see Hayeju confronting the giant, but before she lands any attacks, she asks Choi Yul once again if he's not sure of what he told her. At this point, Choi is already confident in the demonic book, so he asks her to trust him, telling her that he's certain their plan will work. Hearing this, Hayeju decides to follow his lead, and even though she has a bad feeling about it, she tells him that she trusts his lead. Then she thrusts her spear into the rock giant, but before she knows what's happening, the massive monster smashes her into the ground. Kon, who is watching from the sidelines, is instantly horrified when he sees this, and he even screams her name in fear that she's dead. But Choi Yul casually tells the sergeant that their friend is fine. He seems completely unbothered by everything, and we start to see why he's so sure that she's okay when a bright light starts to glow from underneath the giant's clamped hands. Choi Yul reveals that all the conditions have been fulfilled, And immediately as he says that, the light glows even brighter until it takes the shape of a huge dragon looming over the giant. Then, a tap pops up to confirm that Hayeju's hidden skill of the Prominence Canine is being activated. The whole place is engulfed in flames as a huge firestorm appears, and the guys on the sidelines watch the entire thing in amazement. This insanely overpowered skill summons the flames of the Empirical Dragon, but it can only be used once. That doesn't really matter right now, since she's fighting the wave boss. So once the skill is completely activated, the flames converge into a single massive ball of fire before blowing the rock giant into pieces. After witnessing the incredibly destructive power of Hayeju's skill, Kon starts to wonder how bad it would have been if it was used in the city. But even though the skill is terrifying, he admits that Choi Yul's book is even more dangerous. The sergeant feels that there's way too much dangerous information in Krasina's book, and he fears that it could lead to the downfall of the city if it's used the wrong way. However, after seeing the hero help Hayeju out of the ruins, Kon realizes that it's a good thing that such an insane power is in the hands of someone responsible. Just then, another notification appears, informing them that they've completed the mission, and that the citizens outside the city will now be transported back inside. The people start to celebrate their victory, chanting the hero's name, and as they do, another tab pops up announcing that the surviving citizens will be rewarded for clearing the wave. They're all given 300 points as a common reward, but because one of their bases was destroyed, 25% is deducted, leaving them with 225 points in total. As for the individual rewards, it's divided into 3 categories: Monster Raid Contribution, Base Defense Contribution, and Wave of Boss Fight Contributions. As per the system, all citizens will be rewarded accordingly after calculations are completed. Upon seeing this, all the surviving citizens are thrilled that they'll be receiving rewards like in a real game, and things get even better when the point shop is opened. With the point shop, the citizens can now purchase things like experience, skills, and equipment, and they can even trade or auction their items. Nurses and doctors rushes to the healing section of the point shop because they're all badly injured. When they get there, 3 categories are presented for them to choose: basic healing for 10 points, which heals all injuries; purification for 10 points, which purifies all status abnormalities; and then regeneration for 20 points, which allows people to get back their amputated body parts. He is relieved that all the injured people will be healed. But when they open the healing shop, they meet a very unpleasant surprise. Everyone is horrified when they see that they still have 0 points, and this is because all rewards have been taken away due to the effect of the sacrifice of sovereignty. After seeing the message, the citizens can't even believe their eyes and start to freak out, wondering what the hell the sacrifice of sovereignty even means. The people continue to panic in frustration, desperate for the points because they need to save the injured. They ask Choi Yul what is going on, and for the first time since acquiring the book, he doesn't know what to tell them. He doesn't know what's happening, and when he looks at his system in the game, he sees that the sacrifices of all the citizens are being multiplied and calculated. All of a sudden, a message pops up on everybody's system to reveal the 3 citizens with the highest points. While the second and third have less than 2,000 points combined, Choi Yul is rewarded with almost 10 billion points in total. Seeing this, he's totally shocked, and so is everyone around who sees the notification. But it doesn't take long before this feeling of shock and sadness quickly turns into resentment toward him. The mob starts marching toward him, demanding to know why he has so many points and accusing him of being responsible for the sacrifice of sovereignty. As the angry people gather, Kon and Hayeju stand in front of Choi Yul to protect him from their wrath. But even so, Choi doesn't hide there like a coward and decides to defend himself. He completely denies the accusations, explaining that he didn't know the book had such features. But when the sergeant sees the tension, he tells Choi Yul to calm down and reminds him that they have to treat the injured first. Kon then suggests that Choi give out his points to those who need them to prove that he didn't take them on purpose. Unfortunately, even though Choi Yul wants to share the points, Krasina adds a skill that denies him the ability to do so. He then attempts to buy healing items for the people, but the skill restricts him from doing this as well. At this point, he's quite desperate, so he asks Hayeju to burn the book, hoping it would remove the restrictions. But things don't work as he wants. That's when Choi realizes that he's in big trouble. He runs away with the book, leaving the dying citizens behind as they beg for points. We know that he's not actually trying to betray them but still needs some time and space to find a solution. Meanwhile, Kon is notified by his superiors that the death toll is rising and that the people are extremely enraged. So while he is flipping the pages to find a solution, the sergeant appears behind him and points a gun at his head, telling him that he's left with no other choice. Kon tells Choy that he's under arrest, but the angry civilians aren't satisfied with that punishment, and they agitate for Choi Yul to either be killed or forced to distribute the points. They all try to get their hands on the hero, but Hayeju holds them back with her spear, begging them to calm down. While all of that commotion is under, the sergeant whispers in Choi Yul's ear, telling him to run away. He doesn't believe it at first, but then Kon repeats his words again, telling him to find a way to fix this mess as fast as he can. After the soldier says this, he immediately purchases extra agility and blasts off into the air like a rocket, leaving the other citizens even more furious. All of them are enraged when they see that he escaped, but the anger is interrupted when they all receive a notification informing them that the next mission is in 24 hours. Seeing the countdown in their tabs, all the people are horrified, and some of them even forget their grudge with Choi Yul. Meanwhile, Kon and the other soldiers direct the people to return to the safe areas, while the injured ones among them should be taken to the cars. But while some people try to organize the commotion, Hayeju just stares into space, not knowing what to say. Later, we see most of the citizens gathered in the safer parts of the city, and they're given the choice between staying to fight or leaving. The announcer tells the crowd that those who are willing to fight in the next mission should go to the left, while those who want to evacuate the city should go right. Before they start picking sides, the man reminds them to check their status windows frequently, and warns them not to leave the evacuation center. Apart from that, he also tells them to memorize the locations of temporary bases and other evacuation centers. However, the most important announcement he gives is that anyone who spots Choi Yul should not engage with him, and after identifying his location, report to the authorities. The potential witnesses are advised to cover their ears and run away as fast as they can. On top of that, the people are also advised to isolate themselves from the mission if any of them hear any information from him about it. This is to ensure that they don't risk the other citizens' chances of getting their rewards after the mission, to prevent anyone from becoming a sacrifice of sovereignty, and then hiding it from the public. The city decides that anyone who's caught doing it will be automatically violating the law, and as a result they will be punished accordingly. While all of this is going on, we see Choi Yul in an alley drawing a magic circle on the floor with red chalk. Kon, Hayeju and other citizens prepares themselves for the next mission. Soon the dice is cast, and afterward, the pawn on which the city stands moves 4 paces forward. Once this happens, some more notifications appear, announcing that the city has arrived in the Demon King's seal space, and that demonic pillars to undo the seal will appear along with the pillar guardians. Their mission is to destroy all the demonic pillars within the given time, because if they fail to do so, the Demon King will be summoned. After this announcement, another one appears revealing that the time for the mission is being set, along with the number of pillars and the difficulty of the pillar guardians. For the next message, they're informed that this mission will last for 5 days. When Kon and Hayeju see this, they both notice that the deadline is longer than usual. They are then notified that the first pillar guardian has a difficulty of 1. And this creature is identified as the fateless fallen angel that wanders around looking for his lost fate. When the guardian appears, it doesn't take too much to see that it's actually very terrifying. It has the torso and head of a skeleton along with 3 long creepy arms, but the most prominent features of this creature are the huge pairs of wings, which also happen to have eyes on them. The second pillar guardian also has a difficulty level of 1, and it's even more hideous than the first. This pillar guardian is called the Mad Brains, and it's a being that just can't stop creating things. The more time that passes, the better its creations are, and that's not the only scary thing about it because it also looks like a giant mechanical ant with a massive brain that's almost spilling out of the skull. For the third pillar guardian, the citizens would have their work cut out for them because for the first time they'll be facing a boss with a difficulty level of 3. This pillar guardian is called Goblin Sword Master Jack, and from his stats, you can tell that he won't be an easy opponent to defeat. This boss has reached the peak of martial arts, and has gone through some body transformation as well. He is even trying to undo the seal of the Demon King just so he can challenge him in battle. However, Choi doesn't look too bothered by all that's happening. In fact, he even seems happy about it because he just lies there on top of the seal he drew, smiling as he stares at the sky. Elsewhere, we see Kon receiving news that the civilians have started attacking, which was definitely not a part of the plan. Just like the last mission, they attempt to blow the first Pillar Guardian to bits, even though the soldiers try to dissuade them. Unfortunately, it doesn't work because the civilians become uncontrollable. And when Kon receives this news, he's so confused that he's lost for words. Eventually, he decides that the soldiers get moving too, so he tries to ask Hayeju what she thinks. But when he looks at the place she was standing a few seconds ago, he's shocked to see that the girl has already left. At this point, the sergeant starts to think that the whole mission has become a mess, and he's disappointed that their perfect system of cooperation and coordination has fallen in just a day. While he's brooding over the mountain of problems at hand, the scene shifts, and we see Hayeju taking matters into her own hands by confronting one of the guardians. And of all the guardians she could have challenged, the white-haired warrior decides to fight the one with the highest difficulty, Goblin Sword Master Jack. She sees the creature sitting quietly in his cave and decides that she'll kill him before he can hurt any civilians. As she initiates her attack, her white hair turns to the flaming gold color again, and then she jumps into the air, forming a huge firestorm to attack the monster. Just when she thinks she'll land the killing blow with her spear, the Goblin Sword Master effortlessly stops the attack with his blade. He doesn't even look at her before hooking her attack, and the girl is so baffled that she just hangs in the air for a while, trying to understand what just happened. While she's still stunned, the Pillar Guardian casually spins his sword with her spear still hooked to it. As a result, the force spins her around in the air, causing her to lose her bearings before the goblin sends a powerful slash in her direction. After sending the girl flying, the Guardian's blade starts to glow with a bright blue color, and he just chills in front of his post, feeling very confident. But all of a sudden, the mood changes drastically. Before Hayeju can crash into the ground, Choy arrives to save her just in time. He catches her in the air and then slowly lands in front of the Goblin Sword Master. She is shocked to see him, but before they can share any other pleasantries, Choi Yul asks her if she can tell something to the people. She's curious to hear what he wants to tell them, even though she should be scared that it could make her a sacrifice of the sovereignty. With a smug look on his face, he starts by talking about the rewards, and he immediately assumes that he wants to return them or something. But Choi drops a bombshell when he suddenly tells her that he'll be keeping all the rewards for himself. Hayeju still can't believe it, but it turns out that he's actually very serious. He suddenly starts walking away, telling her to advise the civilians not to come near him if they don't want their rewards getting stolen. He walks out on the girl, leaving her heartbroken, shocked, and disappointed at the same time. At this point, it's starting to look like he might be turning into a villain. As he leaves her there, he thinks about how there was no way to give the people back their rewards, and on top of that, he didn't find a single way to escape from the demon book either. For some reason, Choi Yul then decides to use his points in exchange for some stats. The stats shop opens, and he's informed that his stats will increase by the number of points he uses. And when he's prompted to say the stats and the number he wants to increase them by, Choi decides to max out everything. The moment that happens, all the other citizens receive notifications informing them that Choi Yul is the first human to max out all his stats to 100. This includes his intellect, wisdom, agility, health, and also his stamina. This insane upgrade costs him over 400,000 points. So he asks the game how much equipment dice he got from it, while also asking the system to get rid of everything below the magical class. He then requests that the system automatically roll everything that can give him equipment above the heroic class as well. Once the dice roll is complete, Choi Yul acquires 142 legendary class items along with over 1,000 heroic class equipment. Hayeju just watches in amazement as the hero puts his incredible upgrade on display. And while she's staring at him, Choi decides that since he can't get rid of the book, or its curse, he'll simply start using it to his advantage. He plans to use all the rewards given to him to protect the city, and put an end to this damn game so he can go back to his normal life. Choi Yul knows that this is the only way he can atone for his sins, and he doesn't mind playing the villain until he's achieved his goals. While Choi is vowing to make things right, the system suddenly releases a notification announcing that the Pillar Guardian, Jack, smiles and prepares to attack when he sees a strong enemy. When we take a closer look at the green guy's face, there's a confident smile etched on it. However, Choi doesn't seem to be in the mood to entertain the goblin, so he bluntly tells him that he doesn't have time to play around. Hearing him say this, the Pillar Guardian is shocked and confused, but then all of a sudden, our hero's shoes begin to glow. It turns out that he activated his magic air shoes, which is a pair of heroic rank shoes that essentially allows the user to fly. These shoes can also allow Choy to change direction midair and move around freely, but their usage will result in continuous consumption of mana. Before the Goblin Sword Master can even understand what's going on, Choy blasts off into the air like a rocket, promising to come back soon and asking the Pillar Guardian to just wait for him. The green guy isn't the only one shocked to see this because Hayeju, who is standing there the entire time, is also confused as to why he'd suddenly just leave instead of fighting the enemy. But while she's getting worked up over the whole thing, Mr. Swordmaster just goes back to chill in front of the pillar. Hayeju is even more confused when she sees that the boss monster is actually going to wait for Choy rather than choosing to go after him. The girl takes a closer look at the goblin, and while she's trying to figure out what's going on, Choy thinks about how the goblin probably doesn't attack first in battles. In fact, he won't even attack anyone as long as he's not confronted. After coming to this conclusion, we see Choy bouncing off the tall buildings in the city like Spider-Man. He uses his magic air shoes to lift himself high into the air before suddenly landing a devastating kick on the Fateless Angel's head. The winged skeleton probably didn't see it coming because it couldn't even do anything to counter the attack. Choy uses the lethal kick to crack the angel's skull, and while he's breaking it to pieces, he decides that he's going to fight Goblin Sword Master Jack after dealing with the other Pillar Guardians. Unfortunately, when the other citizens see this epic display of heroism, they're far from impressed. Instead, they're furious that he had the gall to come back after using up all of their points. So, as the hateful mob they've become, they start chanting for the hero to be killed. However, their motivation to actually do anything to Choy dies when they see just how destructive he is in the air. Bro literally turns into the Flash with his insane speed, and the explosions in the air are so insane that all the citizens watching from below just stare into the flaming sky with their dumb expressions. While they're watching him with their jaws on the floor, the hero continues to flex his new powers in the air. He thinks about how a Pillar Guardian's unique trait will be unlocked if he fulfills a certain condition. The good thing is that some of these traits make the monsters weaker. However, if he fulfills the wrong condition, then he could accidentally make the Guardians stronger than they already are. And if that doesn't happen, then some annoying traits will be unlocked, making it harder to deal with the monsters. One of these conditions is that the Pillar Guardian he's currently fighting will evolve into a fallen angel that will slaughter all of mankind if it manages to kill 100 humans. At that point, it will become way stronger than it currently is, and then it would even leave the pillar it's supposed to defend so it can kill the humans instead. Thankfully, our hero isn't going to just sit back and let that happen. He grabs his sword to prepare for an epic showdown, and vows that he's going to get rid of the Pillar Guardians using any means possible. With this in mind, he slashes the wings of the Fateless Angel using his blazing red sword, knowing that after using the annoying traits, he'll be able to unlock the traits that are necessary for the mission. After cutting the wings off the angel's back, all that's left is a flightless skeleton monster that immediately plummets down. But before the creature can crash to the ground, Choy dives after it to catch it. This is because he knows that the most important thing isn't just defeating the Pillar Guardians, or clearing the mission. Rather, what matters most is how he proceeds through the wave. While the hero is in the air trying to catch the falling angel, we see Cone driving a military truck along the ruins. While driving, he contacts the HQ and requests that they give an order for everyone to stay at least 500 meters away from the pillars until they're certain about our hero's intentions. After making the request, the sergeant starts to wonder if the hero has failed to find a way to return the rewards to the rightful owners or if he just decided that he's not going to care. As he continues to speed along the road, Cone thinks back to his time with Choy and admits that he didn't seem like a bad person at all. But regardless, he reminds himself that he can't afford to make decisions based on his feelings. That's about the same time that he starts to realize that someone as intelligent as Choy, who also has the kind of insane power he currently does, can easily take over the city and dominate the entire place if he wants to. Apart from the hero, Cone also thinks about Hayeju and starts to fear that she might also be uncontrollable in the future. The sergeant suddenly drives into the hot zone of Choy's battle with the Pillar Guardian, but because he's driving too fast, he can't slow down, and it almost ends with him getting blasted with a giant red beam. Even though the blast doesn't hit his truck, the impact from it sends the truck flying in the air till it crashes several meters away. Kon and his men are unharmed, so they quickly make their way out of the tumbled truck. Wondering what on earth just happened to them, one of the other soldiers tries to check on the sergeant to see if he's fine. But at that point in time, Kon is more concerned with figuring out what happened. When the soldiers take a closer look, they see Choy standing on top of the fateless angel's corpse while holding its severed wings in his hands. It turns out that the blast from earlier was actually Choy piledriving the evil angel into the ground. When Kon sees him holding the huge creepy wings, he almost can't believe his eyes, and while he's bamboozled by the sight, we get to see the legendary sword called the Divine Divide that our hero used to cut the wings. This rare and insanely powerful weapon is revealed to be a fragment of a sword that once divided the heavens and the earth to create the world. But now, Choy is informed that the blade has lost some of its power. Apart from being devastatingly sharp and powerful, this weapon also has the ability to turn the amputated parts of monsters into items. Eventually, Kon gets out of his dumbfounded state and approaches the hero to express his surprise that he came back and even managed to defeat one of the Pillar Guardians. He admits that he didn't expect to see him so soon. And upon hearing this, Choy just gives him a small smile before taking to the skies once again. Seeing the hero jet off like that, the sergeant starts to wonder if he didn't say anything because of the sacrifice of sovereignty. While he's lost in thought, he doesn't even notice his surroundings. A younger officer suddenly calls out to the sergeant, trying to tell him something about the Pillar Guardian, but Kon just assumes that he wants to inform the headquarters about its defeat. It's only when the guy points at the giant creature that the man turns to see that the fateless angel is still very much alive. The Pillar Guardian suddenly starts to get up again, and we discover that a certain condition to unlock a special trait has already been fulfilled. In order for these traits to be unlocked, it was required for the wings and halo of the angel to be removed. The result of this action is the activation of a special trait called corruption, which ultimately means that the fateless angel will now transform into the beast of corruption, an entirely different entity. Just like Choy initially feared, this new version of the Pillar Guardian is a lot stronger than the original, as it even has a difficulty level of 2. The corruption beast is described as a beast that has lost its faith and fallen into the path of sin. Because of this, God has abandoned this creature, and it becomes pretty clear why when we get to see the nightmarish monster roaring at the soldiers standing in front of it. As Kon finds himself face to face with the terrifying mountain of a creature, he can't help but think about what a tough life he's living. Regardless, this sergeant isn't just going to fold in front of the ugly beast of corruption. So he quickly organizes his men to prepare for the battle ahead. The soldiers march toward the creature, and as he shoots at it, he reminds himself how there are only 3 absurdly strong monsters in the current mission. Even though he continues to unload rounds of bullets at the mutated beast, it just keeps moving away to safety. As he watches it climb a tall building, he begins to wonder why Choy would leave them to face such a strong monster. When the sergeant realizes that the monster will most likely get away, he decides to call for backup. Just when he's about to give their current location to the HQ, the corrupt beast finally snaps and turns around to attack the soldiers. They all jump out of the way as fast as they can, and when they see that the monster isn't even taking a breather, they decide to start running for their lives. At this point, they all suffer from the status of normality of fear, which causes them to lose the will to fight. They desperately try to evade the enemy. Kon quickly realizes what's happening to them, and because he knows what would happen if they lose, he fights his fears and summons the courage to face the monster once again. He shoots at the creature, yelling for it to follow him because he's come up with a plan to lure it away from the others. Kon hopes to keep the monster away from the others long enough for them to call for backup. But before he can make any progress, the corrupt beast smashes him into the ground with EAS. Immediately after this happens, we see Choy wearing a satisfied smile on his face as he confirms that another concern of his has been taken care of. All of a sudden, a bright light starts to shine from under the creature's palm, the same way it did when Hayeju was smashed by the stone giant. It turns out that this is happening because the conditions for Hen's hidden skill have been fulfilled. These conditions include being on the brink of death due to an attack from a corrupt monster, and then being the leader of a party of more than 5 people. Because our soldier dude has achieved these things, the skill called Hen's Ghost is activated, which possesses the user with the ghost of Helden, the heretic inquisitor. As the sergeant gets possessed, he starts to mutter some strange things about a goddess's iron. We soon learn that this skill will only last for 10 minutes, and within this time, all of his equipment will be imbued with divinity. His defense against dark attribute attacks will be increased, and something called the fanatic mode will be activated as well. This fanatic mode increases power and healing, nullifies all sources of fear, and causes the user to lose all sense of reason with the sole purpose of attacking the dark-type monsters. In other words, this skill is about to turn the possessed sergeant into a killer zombie on steroids. Another feature of this crazy skill is the fact that Cone isn't the only one who's affected by fanatic mode. All the soldiers in his party are also possessed by the ghosts, causing them to all mindlessly chant the same thing about the goddess's iron club. From the glowing tears flowing out of their eyes and the fact that they're screaming in agony, Choy watches from the sidelines and becomes a bit worried about the display because he didn't think it would be so scary. We see a flashback scene of Cone standing before the battalion commander, Colonel Kim Song, and he almost doesn't believe what the boss is telling him. So the colonel reiterates that he's going to give him a car and then leave him to defend for himself. But when Cone hears this, he points out that the privilege is too great for a mere sergeant. The battalion commander commends him for having courage and admitting his honesty despite his lower rank. Hearing this, he's speechless for a moment, so Kim Song proceeds to inform him that the military barely has any intel on the current situation. The battalion commander tells Cone that they need a calm observer in such times. They need someone calm and rational, a person who never loses his cool and is capable of making logical judgments in unexpected situations. In summary, the military needed a cold, rational observer for the mission, and truly, that's what the sergeant has been until he got possessed. We catch up in the present where Cone and his men, who are still being controlled by the fanatic skill, are unleashing an attack on the corrupt beast. The sergeant orders his fellow possessed men to charge at the monster, and they do it without hesitation by using their divine skills to fight. One of them even uses a divinity skill called Flame, which allows him to conjure the goddess's mace, which he uses to stab a joke into the Pillar Guardian's body. The battalion commander felt that Cone would be the perfect person for this quiet operation, but here he is now just a few hours later, completely unaware of the fanatic killer he's become. Not long after the sergeant and his men kill the monster in the name of their goddess, Kim Song suddenly receives a message informing him that they've knocked down the first Pillar Guardian in the city. In the message, the highest contributing party is identified as the independent scout squad led by Sergeant Cone. The battalion commander is taken aback when he sees such a message because even though he expected the sergeant to succeed, he didn't expect him to do it so quickly. Either way, he's impressed and even prides himself on having a good eye for picking the perfect man for the job. Meanwhile, Choy is also taking credit for the victory, talking about how the Poster Guardian's stamina was low enough for Cone and his men to easily take it down. It turns out that even after the monster evolved into a corrupt beast, its stamina remained the same, so it was easier to defeat. But that's not the only thing Choy considered before setting the sergeant up for the battle. This is because when the Fateless Angel transformed into a new beast, it automatically reset his own contribution to the fight, leaving the soldiers to reap all the benefits of their kill. Choy is so excited that he managed to find a solution that he starts telling the Goblin Sword Master all about it. He even asks the green guy for his opinion on the matter. The Straw Hat Samurai just looks at Choy with a very confused expression on his face. However, it turns out that the reason this Pillar Guardian isn't saying anything is that he can't talk. And when our hero realizes this, he admits that he knows how frustrating it can be, so he's glad that the goblin is listening to his story at least. Still, the Sword Master doesn't say anything, so Choy suddenly suggests that they make a bet, which the goblin doesn't really have a say in. For this bet, if the hero wins, then he'll break the Demon King's seal. But when the Pillar Guardian hears this, the confusion on his face turns to rage. Meanwhile, in other parts of the city, we see Hayeju hurling huge flames at a level 1 difficulty monster called an anti-human machine. And she notices that there's something clearly strange going on after the rescue call. She went to the second pillar to face the Guardian there, but when she arrived, she was faced with an army of the anti-human machines that had been ordered to kill her. This whole situation is very bad because it's almost like there's no end to the robots, and to make matters worse, they keep upgrading again and again, making them harder to destroy. Because of this, Hayeju decides that she has to find a way to end the problem with a deadly skill before the monsters can get even more dangerous. But for this plan to work, she needs everyone to retreat for now, so she orders them to leave the scene. Unfortunately, they all start to wonder why she wants them to leave, and some of them even start to suggest that she's trying to take all the points for herself. As a result, they start to argue amongst themselves about who needs points the most, and with everyone claiming themselves to be more deserving, they refuse to let their suffering be in vain. Two of these warriors aim their crossbows at the monster, intending to use their magic-grade weapon to attack it. However, before they can land a shot, Mad Brains turns around to glare at them, and the terrifying face of the monster almost causes the horrified men to pee their pants. All of a sudden, this giant robot ant with an overflowing brain blasts a huge beam at the warriors. Hayeju arrives just in time to use her spear to deflect the blast. As she struggles to stay strong and protect them, the cowardly men just stand behind her like two terrified puppies. Eventually, the Pillar Guardian stops blasting her, and by the time it's done, we see that Hayeju's clothes have been burned a lot by the attack, but the men behind her are nearly unscathed. Just then, she turns around to look at them, and for the second time, she tells them to run away as fast as they can. This time around, after witnessing the destructive power the Pillar Guardian holds, they're no longer in the mood to risk their lives for some points. They start bolting away like the cowards they are, screaming for someone to save them. And after seeing their comical display, the spear warrior can't help but giggle. But this moment of relief is cut short when the Pillar Guardian starts analyzing her body to determine the risk factor of fighting her. By the time the analysis is complete, the monster has the perfect idea of what kind of weapon can be used to defeat her, and immediately commences production of the anti-Hayeju machine. When the warrior in question realizes what the Pillar Guardian is doing, she decides that she has to find a way to stop it. But before she can even come up with a plan, several robot monsters charge at her to buy time for their master. The girl finds the aggro to be quite annoying at first, but soon realizes that this could work in her favor. While defending herself against the robots, she instantly activates her flame skill, engulfing all the machines surrounding her into balls of flames. After dealing with the robots, she lifts her flaming spear in the air and warns all the civilians around to fall back. Hearing this, all the people start running for their lives. And while that's happening, Hayeju unleashes a huge blast of fire on the Pillar Guardian, which causes an explosion so big that the waves from the blast toss all the running civilians into the air. As they all find themselves airborne, they begin to fear that the white-haired warrior will be the death of them. Unfortunately, the massive fire blast turns out to be futile because when the dust clears, she sees the Guardian standing with the pillar inside a magical barrier, forcing her to admit the difficulty of her new reality. To make matters worse, the anti-Hu machine has been created, and now it's ready to have a go at the warrior. This mini-transformer with wings has a difficulty level of 2. It's resistant to fire, equipped with a dragon slayer that deals extra damage to Hayeju, and also automatically senses any of her incoming attacks. This thing is literally a weapon that's fashioned against our girl, and it wastes no time before going into kill mode. The robot attacks her from behind with great speed, but she manages to block the laser beam with her spear. At this point, she's already exhausted, and the fact that she has to face another deadly robot makes her want to give up. But then all of a sudden, she turns to look at the pillar, and is surprised to see Choy sneaking up on the Guardian. Bro wastes no time before slicing the boss monster's head clean off, and before she can understand what he's doing with the severed head, a huge explosion follows. This one is even bigger than the one she caused earlier, and after the dust settles, this time Hayeju is missing, and all that's left in her place is a puddle of blood. The machine designed to kill her immediately commences tracking her down, and that's the same time we find out that Mad Brains isn't even dead. On top of that, it appears that Choy has also unlocked a new trait in the monster by eliminating its brain. This unique trait is called Mad Order, and it basically means that the last produced item will be repeatedly crafted over and over again. It also doubles the Pillar Guardian's manufacturing speed along with the number of items produced. But the worst feature of this trade is the fact that the production won't stop until the main network of the monster is destroyed. Choy is staring into the sky, thinking about how the pillar took a lot longer to destroy than he expected. Because too many people are still hiding out of fear. In a flashback scene, we see the first post getting blown up by the civilians with rocket launchers and other explosive weapons. But even after firing everything they've got, they realize that the pillar is too sturdy and start to complain about not having enough firepower. At the second post, it's a similar situation, but in their case, they're being overpowered by the anti-Hayeju machines. And it's getting to the point where those who are already wounded are forced to retreat. This is because they know that it's over once one of them dies and that there's no coming back. So, as the injured civilians leave the battlefield, the remaining warriors stay back to fight even harder. On their way out of the place, several army trucks arrive to help evacuate them. And while they're struggling to get themselves to safety, Choy watches from above and thinks about how he can easily wipe out all the living beings around to end the commotion. However, he opts not to do this because he feels that it would be meaningless to conquer the entire game. While he's mentally debating himself, the soldiers come out of the trucks, and we see Sergeant Cone leading the rescue operation. It's good to have strong fighters like the sergeant and his soldiers. But Choy decides that if the city is going to survive the game, then everyone in it needs to get stronger. For this to happen, Choy believes that the first thing that needs to be set up is a capable commander and a champion unit. Thankfully, the city already has Cone's special squad, who are showing great potential in the wars to come. But while the troop is marching towards the army of human-killing robots, we see that Hayeju is seriously injured elsewhere. The spear warrior opens her eyes and is quite surprised that she's still alive. She turns around to see how she even survived and finds herself lying at the feet of the goblin sword master. Feeling very confused, she asks the pillar guardian if he was the one who saved her, but he doesn't say a word because he supposedly cannot talk. When she doesn't get a response, she starts to panic and scream, thinking that the green guy is going to hurt her. But her yelling is cut short when the pillar guardian shocks her by telling her to shut up. She's completely taken aback when she hears the goblin speak, and she doesn't even notice what happened. It's only after she tries to apologize for screaming that she realizes the goblin actually talked to her. The green samurai keeps quiet again, and the girl starts to get pissed off, thinking that he's ignoring her. However, he proves her wrong by revealing that he treated her wounds. After telling her this, he claims that they don't have much time and suggests that they start something right away. Hayeju doesn't have a clue what he's talking about, so she asks him what he's planning to start. The pillar guardian then decides to tell her what the hero said earlier. It turns out that Choy made a statement saying that meeting a good teacher and cultivating one's strength after suffering a huge defeat is a cliché. Goblin Sword Master Jack says this to Hayeju like she's supposed to somehow understand him. But just like the first time, she still has no idea what he means. While she's still perplexed by the green creature and his parables, the scene shifts elsewhere, and we see that the anti-Hayeju machine has detected her location. The killer robot jets into the air towards the target's location, and as it gets closer, it commences annihilation protocol for the spear warrior. However, this plan is foiled when all of a sudden, Choy appears along its path to stop its attack on the girl. Bro stops the robot's supercharged punch with his fist, and starts laughing like he didn't just do something that shouldn't even be possible. He then reveals that he fooled the machine just like he did before by using a hero-grade trinket called the Mad Link Brain. This allows him to confuse monsters with machine attributes. This skill also allows Choy to disarm mechanical traps and devices 5 times per mission. Using this power, the hero tricked the robot into thinking that the pillars were Hayeju. So it ended up blowing up the pillars instead of the people. As the machine's large and dangerous beams blasted the posts, even the civilians were shocked at what was going on. After the killer robot unleashes the devastating blasts on the pillars, Choy finally feels satisfied that the amount of damage should be enough to complete the mission for the town. The scene catches up in the present, where he's still facing off with the anti-Hayeju machine, and he's currently pissing it off by revealing how he tricked it into doing all the work for him. With a smug look on his face, he thanks the robot because it seems like all their problems have been solved. And since that's out of the way, he also suggests they get back to playing the game of hide and seek. While he's busy taunting the robot, the actual target is being attacked by the strongest pillar guardian. The guy uses a single swing of his blade to strike at her, and although she blocks it with her spear, she struggles to stay on her feet because of how strong he is. He gives her a very hard time and then challenges her to try using her power skill from earlier. This motivation works, and she immediately activates the skill, which turns her hair to the flaming gold color again. Seeing this, the goblin tells her not to forget that overdoing the power skill could hurt her. At this point, we start to understand that he's actually not fighting our girl at all but teaching her instead. After reminding her not to go overboard with the power, the goblin comments that it's more important for her to know how to handle her current strength rather than borrowing more power blindly. As they both clash weapons again, the Pillar Guardian tells her to make sure her power doesn't wield her, and explains to her that she must be the one in control of it instead. It appears that this training is working out very well because the look of fear and uncertainty suddenly disappears from her face and gets replaced by a very bold and ferocious smile. As she leaps into the air with her spear to deliver a powerful attack, unfortunately, only her courage and bravery aren't enough to defeat the much more experienced sword master. She gets knocked down on her bottom, and while she's panting heavily, she's shocked to hear that Choy made a bet with the goblin about making her strong enough to win against the robot. The Pillar Guardian confirms this, so she asks him if it's really possible. But the goblin doesn't bother to reply. When she realizes that the guy is keeping quiet and turning his back to her again, she immediately starts thinking about how discouraging his behavior is. The goblin suddenly breaks the silence by asking her why she allowed him to teach her, and he inquires if it's because she trusts Choy or just because she knows she has to get stronger. Hayeju admits that she doesn't really know either. And hearing this, the Pillar Guardian is quite surprised. She claims that the whole game and its missions are all full of stuff that she doesn't understand, and she feels that she's not smart enough to find all the answers. So she feels that she has to strengthen her body first, at least, which might enable her to start figuring things out on her own. The warrior concludes her little speech by getting back on her feet and comments that this is how she has always worked. At this point, Goblin Sword Master Jack has a smile on his face, showing that he's both impressed and intrigued by the young lady. Because he initially assumed that she was just being used by the hero. While she's thanking him, he finally realizes that she's no puppet at all, but actually a martial artist walking her own path. And as such, he's even more motivated to help her train. So he smiles once again before suddenly deciding that they continue with their training. 3 days later, we see many injured citizens gathered in the subways, looking lost and defeated. One of the frustrated people down there starts lamenting and wondering when the fight is going to even end. Another one beside him checks his status window and suggests that they go outside to help others. Hearing this, the more devastated guy snaps and shuts him up, asking him if he's crazy. He reminds him that they could lose their reward points again. However, other people at the train station start to feel like it won't matter if they fail the mission because they didn't help the hero. It doesn't take long before commotion fills the air, and everyone starts arguing. Someone among the people yells for everyone to shut it before pointing out that there's a strange sound coming from above. Before anyone can figure out what it is, there's a huge crash from the ceiling of the place. And while they're yelling in shock and fear, the dust clears to reveal the anti-Hayeju machine hovering in front of them. The relentless robot continues to scan the area in search of the spear warrior, hoping to detect her signal. And after a short while, it locks onto a target and commences annihilation. The killing machine suddenly starts blasting all over the place, stating that the target is moving. And after a short while, it announces that the annihilation is complete. So it flies out of the subway, leaving the terrified citizens shivering in terror. They're all still bending their heads in fear and begging the robot to spare them when they realize that none of them were hurt. In fact, the machine is even more surprised when it turns around to see that it actually killed one of its own with the blast. It decides that its mission isn't complete yet, so it initiates another scan of the area to detect the Dragon Girl's signal. But before it can go any further with the process, the spear warrior it's been looking for bursts through the ceiling to interrupt it. Suddenly, all the crying civilians look up to see her, and they almost can't believe their eyes. Because with her flaming hair and majestic outfit, they're starting to think she might actually be an angel. While they're all staring at the fire goddess in amazement and admiration, a notification appears from the system revealing that her special events conditions have been fulfilled. Looks like she successfully became Goblin Sword Master Jack's student and managed to inherit his martial arts. The reward for her unique achievement is equipment of heroic class or higher, and she'll also be granted the ability to learn passively because she's the Sword Master's student. Apart from that, she's also rewarded with powerful armor. It's a heroic class armor called the Illusion Ember, which has the ability to increase her defense power depending on the amount of fire element equipment she has equipped. Meanwhile, outside the subway, we see the hero and the Goblin Sword Master having a chat. Choy asks the Pillar Guardian why he chose just a single piece of equipment for Hayeju, and the goblin reveals that the armor is something that he's used before. Hearing this, Choy asks the green guy about the girl's chances of success with the machine after wearing the armor. And even now, the goblin teacher replies that it's 50-50. While the sword master starts to think about Hayeju, the scene shifts, and we see her in the middle of an intense battle with the killer robot. The girl admits that the machine may be her natural weakness since it was specifically created to kill her. But now she's a much stronger person. The insane fight continues in the subway, and the metal destroyer flies toward the girl with great speed, attempting to crash into her while sending massive surges of electricity in her direction. But the warrior stands her ground, determined to counter all of its attacks. Over here, the goblin is thinking that if the girl awakens to his true teachings during the fight, then he's sure that the metal bastard won't be her natural enemy anymore. Meanwhile, back in the fight, the robot is still trying to blast her with all of its might. But all of a sudden, the girl starts to activate one of her new skills called the Sword Master Student. This skill will ensure that her proficiency with close-range weapons will now increase faster. So you can imagine how much more intense the battle is about to become. While the girl is getting supercharged for the next round of the fight, the scene shifts for a bit. And we find out that it's now been 3 days, 15 hours, and 34 minutes since the beginning of the mission. Since then, the first mission has been destroyed. Meanwhile, 3 days, 17 hours, and 21 minutes since the start of the mission, and the second Pillar Guardian is just getting destroyed thanks to the sergeant and his special unit of elite soldiers. On the other hand, 3 days, 21 hours, and 1 minute since the start of the mission, we finally see that the Spear Warrior has stabbed the killer robot to finally defeat the special monster that was created to annihilate her. Elsewhere, we see that 4 days into the mission, most of the citizens have returned to the game. Cone and his team are the first to see the return of the civilians who left before, and they're being led by none other than Hayeju, the powerful warrior. However, that's not all that happened because 4 days and 3 hours after the mission started, the second pillar itself is destroyed. It was at that moment that the people of the city finally started to believe that they can actually win the game by themselves. They're all excited that they could finish a mission without Choi's help and his demonic book, which would take away their rewards. This is what they thought, but they were all oblivious to the truth. After all, Choy was still the one pulling the strings to help them each step of the way. While he's reading Krasina's book with a fulfilled smile on his face, the Goblin Sword Master interrupts him to remind him of the deal that made earlier. He decides that he's going to keep his promise since his student was able to win even though she still has a long way to go. The scene shifts to somewhere else in the city, and we see the soldiers at their camp sharing food with the civilians. While that's happening, the former sergeant receives a scolding from Kim Song over the radio because he's furious that even though he sent him to discreetly survey the area, the dude came back as a general. Cone apologizes to the battalion commander, but the guy insists that an apology just won't cut it. Either way, he tells the new general to leave the protection of the injured to him and the other soldiers and permits Cone to do whatever he wants going forward. Kim Song promises to promote him if he does well with his freedom, and the former sergeant tries to argue that he doesn't need the promotion. But before he can finish talking, the battalion commander hangs up. At this point, the guy is so exasperated that he just heaves a frustrated sigh, thinking about how much he misses his mom. Suddenly, Hayeju appears, calling out to him and informing him that they should get going as well. The man agrees, but he's a bit concerned about her safety, so he asks her if she's sure she'll be all right. In response, the girl assures him that she already promised her master she'll do it. We then see a flashback scene from when Hayeju was training under the Goblin Sword Master, and in that scene, he told her that they'll be enemies the next time they meet. Back in the present, we see Kon having doubts about the fight. He's not sure if he can win this next mission because he knows that the spear warrior is no match for a monster with a difficulty level of 3. And he's very scared that a lot of people will die no matter the outcome of the battle. In his confused and troubled state, he starts wondering what the hero is thinking. And just as he was wondering about Choi's whereabouts, something appears in the sky which makes Hayeju freak out. And when the former sergeant takes a closer look, he's surprised to see that it's Choy. Before they can even realize what he's doing, Choy proves why exactly he's the hero of the story by instantly destroying the Demon King's seal with a single blow. Hayeju and Kon just stare at Choy with wide eyes and drop jaws because they can't believe what just happened. The system then releases a notification confirming that the seal has been able to help them probably have an easier time wrapping the hero's insane power around their heads. The system also confirms that Choy is the destroyer, and then reveals that the mission's goal has been changed because now they'll have to do something even more difficult, which is killing the Demon King himself. The moment this announcement appears, the sky turns red, and several demonic angels fly out. There are so many of them that from a distance they look like a trail of black ominous smoke. They'll be forced to fight the Demon King and his dark angels. They also can't afford to lose. When the terrified civilians see the calamity that's about to befall them, there's only one person they can blame, and it's none other than Choy. At this point, some of them have concluded that he's a psycho bastard. Even his friends Hayeju and Kon are so shocked that they're finding it hard to justify his decision, while the girl just screams like a maniac. The soldier is just as devastated, and as they see the scale of destruction about to befall them, they're both asking themselves the same thing: what the hell was Choy thinking? Even the goblin sword master just stands and looks up at the sky as it gets filled with dark angels and admits that he didn't really expect the hero to do something so irrational. But he's not bothered in the slightest. In fact, he's kind of excited because he believes that for the first time there are some interesting humans in the game. The green samurai slowly unsheathes his sword with a wide smile on his face because he knows he's about to have a lot of fun. He pulls out his blade and tosses away the sheath before blasting himself into the air to slaughter some angels. We finally get to see just how much of a cold-blooded killer this goblin can be when he finally goes into his beast mode. He literally slices over 10 dark angels in a split second and ends up making a bloody salad with them without even realizing it. With every swing of the sword, the goblin either decapitates or guts out the demon chickens flying all over the place. And just like before, Kon and Hayeju are dumbfounded when they see the bloody display. The green samurai flexes his insane killing abilities and tells them that what he's currently doing is a gift. It's a homework that he's leaving for his student, so he implores Hayeju to devote herself so that she can become strong like him as well. You realize how crazy this green killer is when you see that he literally gives this little pep talk while casually standing on the back of one of the dark angels. Unfortunately, it seems like he won't be around to see her achieve the greatness he's trained her for because he tells her to stay in the grind until they meet again. Meanwhile, we see Choy and his floating book running toward the Demon King. But there's something different about him this time, and it's the fact that he's wearing the halo he took away from the fallen angel. This legendary class accessory is a powerful item that protects the user while he's inside the demon realm, and Choy intends to use it in his battle against the Demon King. It doesn't take long before we see a disgusting creature hanging around there, and Choy doesn't hesitate to confront it. He assumes that it's the Demon King and points out how getting into the demon realm was easier than expected. That's when the monster turns to him, and Choy asks him if he knows about the Demon King of Sovereignty, Krasina. The beast claims it's never heard that name, but he's more concerned with figuring out how a human got into their realm. It turns out that this big gross beast is the Demon King of Authority, Tambaba. It has a level 6 difficulty, and his special qualities are the fact that he feels pleasure when he destroys things with his bare hands. He also absorbs the flesh and bones of the opponents he kills to further reinforce his fists. Hearing that Taba doesn't know about Krasina, Choy expresses his disappointment because he thought that the Demon Kings would interact with one another. Either way, he accepts the fact and turns around to continue his search, leaving Tambaba shocked at his fearlessness and utter disregard for his presence. On his way out, the hero casually apologizes for interrupting him and assures him that his next opponent will soon arrive. However, this big gross monster isn't just going to let the tiny human leave so brazenly. He admits how embarrassing it would be for him, and then starts attacking Choy. Just when the monster is about to land a powerful killing blow on Choy, the guy effortlessly jumps out of the way, causing the Demon King to bury his fist into the ground. That's when the Goblin Sword Master also arrives at the scene, and when he sees the fearless boy taunting a Demon King, he's actually horrified and scared on his behalf. However, Choy isn't frightened in the slightest, and when the Demon King of Authority retrieves its hand from the rubble, it's badly injured and spewing out blood for some reason. That's when Choy decides to taunt him some more, claiming that his instincts just kicked in because apparently Tambaba's attempt is against the rules of the game. The Demon King Tambaba looks at his two busted hands and almost can't believe his eyes. He wonders how it's even possible because in his mind, he's facing a mere human. Even though Choy could probably take out this huge beast with ease, he decides to act smart to prevent their altercation from escalating. By telling the Demon King to calm down, assuring him that he didn't mean to turn his hands into mincemeat. Unfortunately, Tambaba doesn't look like he's in the mood for dialogue, so he takes the violent route and decides to attack. He probably assumes that Choy will be an easy win since he's just a human. All of a sudden, his hands start to regenerate, and he tries to intimidate Choy with his powers. But Choy is as unbothered as ever. Choy then asks the Goblin Sword Master if he would like to take his place in the fight. Although he admits that he'd like to switch places with him, he feels that Tambaba only wants to fight Choy. After the Green Warrior explains that the Demon King wouldn't want to fight him, Choy understands and decides to handle things himself. He turns around and gets punched right in the face, and that's when he realizes that he forgot something earlier. The impact sends him flying in the air like a piece of paper, but from the look on his face, he doesn't feel too hurt. Rather, he's thinking about what would happen if the goblin fought the Demon King alone. It turns out that if this happens, then the hidden event called Martial Arts Fate will be completed. As a result, the Pillar Guardian will end up aiming for mutual destruction with the Demon King. This term mutual destruction is actually an attack used when one is ready to die along with the opponent, so it's like a self-destruct button to guarantee the death of an enemy. After its use, the rewards are supposed to get boosted drastically, with the citizens receiving tons of points as well. However, there's a problem with this plan. Before we can find out what Choy has on his mind, Tambaba follows up with another insanely powerful attack by blasting himself toward Choy and stomping him into the ground. He is wearing an armor called the Einheier Battle Jacket, which is a legendary grade equipment. It's widely regarded as the gear of the gods' warriors and helps increase the user's defenses based on their HP. On top of that, it ensures that its durability recovers automatically during fights. So, as Choy lies underneath the foot of the Demon King, the armor starts to glow, implying that it's doing its job. Anyway, we finally get to find out what the problem with the plan is, and it turns out that it's simply the fact that he can't do anything about it because the Goblin Sword Master has already declined his invitation to fight the king. With this in mind, he decides that he's just going to wait until the citizens can accumulate hunting points, and then end the whole game before more people can die. While he's coming up with all of these plans, he's being relentlessly attacked by the Demon King. But it seems he can't even feel the hits because he's even starting to think that the showdown is easier than he expected. As Tambaba continues to throw everything he's got at him, the Green Samurai just watches from afar, utterly dumbfounded by the scene before him. While all of that craziness is going on in the demon realm, the scene shifts back to the city, where we see most of the demon angels that the Sword Master butchered before leaving. Even though he dismembered many of them, there is still a sea of demon angels hovering all over the sky. So, the soldiers of the city are keeping them at bay with several magazines of ammunition. Kone's special squad rains bullets on the flying monsters as they try to evacuate the injured or helpless civilians from the area. They shoot non-stop, trying to make sure that the monsters don't get to them. But it's only a matter of time before they start to get overwhelmed. A very exhausted Kone looks into the monster-filled sky and thinks about how they don't even have any combat power. The only problem is that there are too many. And because of this, he quickly realizes that the city won't last long against them. The angels keep spawning out of nowhere, and to make matters worse, several of the citizens are already badly injured by their lethal claws. The sergeant continues to hold back as many beasts as he can and thinks about how Choy became an enemy to the whole city just for breaking the Demon King's seal. Because of this, Kone strongly feels that it would all be Choy's fault if someone dies today. However, before he can finish the thought, Hayeju arrives on top of a speeding car, and one of the people inside the vehicle points into the sky, announcing loudly that she's spotted at the shelter where the rescue signal is coming from. She acknowledges this information, and without wasting another second, she blasts herself into the air from the top of the speeding car like a rocket. She leaves a huge trail of flames, which helps in roasting some of the demon birds that just happen to be in the way. And by the time she's out of there, all that's left is the remains of fallen angel's dead body. Hayeju gets to the injured civilians so she can help them evacuate to the tower where the rescue signal is coming from. And as the citizens follow her lead, some of them start to lament, blaming Choy for their current dilemma because he was the one who choiked the Demon King's seal. They feel like they would have already cleared the mission by now if it wasn't for Choy. So they're all furious because of the setback. Hayeju hears them say all of these mean things about her friend, but honestly, she doesn't even know what to say because their complaints are valid. Hayeju tries to come up with a response for all the insults they've been letting out on Choy, but she holds herself back. And when one of the other civilians notices this, she's surprised that she just let it slide. The hooded stranger starts talking to Hayeju, admitting that she expected her to explode after hearing the angry people curse her boyfriend. And seeing that she just ignored it, she concludes that the white-haired warrior is more cold-hearted than she initially thought. This nosy woman happens to be Kang Jaiwoo, a level 1 normal citizen. Hayeju snaps at Jaiwoo and denies the assertion that Choy is her boyfriend. Hayeju's cheeks turn bright pink, confirming that she's very flustered. And even though Jaiwoo knows she's right, she just lets the matter go so she doesn't end up offending one of the strongest fighters in their city. Regardless, she keeps the thought in her mind, feeling rather surprised that the girl denied it so aggressively. However, it doesn't stop her from tossing her bag of snacks at the warrior as a show of gratitude for saving her life. And while she's at it, she also uses the opportunity to thank her in advance for escorting them to safety. Hayeju is shocked by the kind gesture, and she thanks her new friend back with a lit-up face. But when she reaches into the bag of chips, she's beyond disappointed to see that all that's left is half a piece. As the wave of disappointment washes over her, the scene shifts back to the demon realm, where we see the Goblin Sword Master stepping into the fight. Goblin Sword Master uses his sword to block an incoming attack that was meant for Choy, and when he tells Choy to stay behind him, he's taking Choy's position in the duel. Seeing this, Choy is quite surprised, and when the samurai sees the worried look on his face, he teases him, asking if he's growing fond of him already. And after that, Choy's conscience takes a critical hit when the goblin suggests that he might even have asked him out for drinks if they'd met in another world. As the green guy keeps Tambaba occupied, he actually starts to feel sorry for him because he realizes that it's too late for him to activate the martial arts fate. And even if there was enough time, he'd feel too guilty to actually do it. Just then, a message from the system appears, informing him that the goblin's friendliness has reached maximum level. And as such, Krasina's hidden skill has been activated. The demonic book starts glowing in a scary red color, and as the pages open, he looks inside and starts to smile. At this point, the green samurai is exhausted and covered in blood, which just goes to show that a demon king is an irregular opponent. Tambaba starts to power up like he's about to unleash an unbelievably lethal attack, so the sword master decides that it's time for him to use his ultimate move as well. Unfortunately, this move would put his life on the line, but he's ready to die using it. The goblin's eyes start to glow with a blue color, and he begins to activate the ultimate move in the name of his friend and disciple. However, just when he's about to sacrifice himself for the greater good, Choy suddenly decapitates the Demon King, splattering several gallons of blood all over the place. Naturally, the goblin's shocked face at this scene is a sight to behold. Tambaba is equally just as surprised, but before he can finish processing anything in his mind, he blows up in a massive burst of blood. Immediately after this happens, another announcement is released confirming that the Demon King Tambaba has been taken down, and that the top contributor is none other than Choy. The entire thing still feels like a dream to the goblin, and while he's still trying to wrap his head around one mystery, another surprise follows in the form of an announcement revealing that all the summoned monsters have been annihilated. All of a sudden, the green samurai starts to vanish. But while he's panicking, Choy just giggles and opens Krasina's book. He then activates a skill that can allow him to sign a familiar spirit contract with a creature that has reached maximum friendliness or fear stats. And since he has 4 available slots, he decides to give the goblin the first one. He initiates the contract, and as a prompt pops up asking for confirmation, the green guy's anxiety level reaches its peak. Choy calms him down by sealing the deal. Afterward, he's sent back to the human realm, and as he falls out of the sky, He thinks about how he's getting further and further away from being human because he's become hated by his kind and now, he's even allied with a monster. However, the only consolation in all that happened recently is the fact that all the surviving citizens will be rewarded accordingly for completing the mission. The common reward, which consisted of mission clearing of the Demon King's resurrection with 10% or fewer deaths and time remaining bonus, all add up to 800 points per citizen. Cone coming in third with just over 3,000 points, Hayeju in the second place with 4,000 plus points, and Choy in first place with over 200,000 points, miles ahead of the rest. When the other citizens see the leaderboard, they're nothing but absolutely enraged. And even though Hayeju doesn't like their reaction, she just keeps her mouth shut to avoid drawing attention to herself. Despite her attempts to stay off the radar, Jaiwood the stalker keeps staring at her. She notices Hayeju's discomfort. After a while, she looks up into the sky and sees something like a meteor crashing down. She wonders if it's the Golden Child himself, or the fuse of a bomb. But either way, she doesn't seem bothered in the slightest, just like many other people in the city. Cone looks up at the sky as well and sees that Choy is returning. He admits that even though he doesn't know much about games, he can tell that this game is about defending a single base with a large number of troops. With this in mind, he starts to wonder if a supreme unit is even possible with their dwindling numbers. Cone thinks about how powerful Choy would be at max level, so he doubts that the game would even allow the citizens to create another defense system in the form of a supreme unit that can take down the Demon King. Just as the sergeant feared outside the confines of the town, we see a huge celestial hand holding 2 dice and a message announcing that an abnormal unit has been detected in the game. This unwanted unit just happens to be Choy, and his profile is shown to the players of the game, revealing all his maxed out stats in every category. The system then presents 4 options to the superior being and asks him to choose one of them to deal with Choy. Annihilation, Reset, Defer, and a Summon button are displayed. And just then, while Choy is still chilling in the sky, the superior being reaches out to push the Annihilation button without hesitation. However, just when the hand is about to press the button to kill him, Choy senses something strange and looks up at the sky to check what's wrong. He doesn't see anything, and it makes him very confused. And as he finally lands on the ground, he starts to wonder if it was all in his imagination because he feels like he was being watched. Meanwhile, back in space, the creature that owns the hand receives an error message because the command could not be carried out. As a result, the system returns to the previous menu. After this, it doesn't take long before the system brings up another message confirming that it's beginning a thorough inspection of the chosen unit. And then the giant hand presses another button to open the monitor of the chosen unit. Suddenly, some changes in the settings occur which cause Choy's unit to become hidden. This means that going forward, other players will not be able to see the chosen unit. After these settings, the game resumes. And we see most of the citizens jubilating because they have finally received their well-deserved rewards. They all rush to the healing shop to take care of their injuries, and while they're all celebrating, one of them announces that he would be revealing the research results about the reward dice. The announcer is currently using a magical class tool called the Messenger's Voice, and it helps transfer the user's voice over very long distances. The man informs the citizens that there are 7 types of dice, and that the numbers on the dice are all different depending on the dice itself. For instance, the 4-faced dice only produces ordinary class equipment. The 6-faced dice produces magical class. The 8-faced produces magical class as well, but when you get to the 10-faced dice, it produces up to 3 magical and 1 heroic class item. As for the 12-faced dice, it can produce up to 4 magical class and up to 2 heroic class equipment. The next is the dice with 20 faces, and this one can produce up to 6 magical class, 3 heroic class, and 1 legendary class equipment. The biggest and rarest dice has 100 faces, which happens to be the type Choy received at the start, and it has remained and found after the first mission. The announcer goes on to explain that items and tools are produced at random, having a different number class for each one. A picture is displayed for a more detailed explanation, and we see that the ordinary items have a number class of 1 to 60. The magical class is between 61 to 80. Heroic class items are between 81 to 94. The legendary are found from 95 to 99, and finally, the mythical class items are in the 100 number class. While the announcer is still talking, Kon receives a heroic tool called the Destiny Spork as his reward, which has the ability to return to its owner even if it's misplaced. On top of that, it always remains clean. With disappointment laced all over his face, he looks at the Destiny Spork and concludes that a high class doesn't guarantee that the item will be anything good. He then takes a look around and sees some of the other citizens trading their items, while some are looking for partners in the next mission. One guy is looking to team up with a long-range dealer for the next mission, while another is looking for people to defend the evacuation center. Kon listens to all the adverts and recalls a certain memory. In the flashback, he asks Hayeju if she is really going to leave. Hayeju says she had decided to take a new path because she doesn't feel she's cut out to be in the military. She claims that there are still a lot of people hiding in fear, and she'd like to help them on her own. Even though Hayeju won't be spending much time with the soldiers anymore, she assures the former sergeant that she'll still help them out during missions. And after she says that, the scene shifts back to the present, where Kon is now coming to terms with the fact that everyone is now slowly adapting to their new reality. Elsewhere, we see Choy chilling on the top of a very tall building to look down at the city, and feeling that the beginning for the citizens is going well so far. He feels this way because the champion who will be the essence of missions and the military have both taken their places. Now, the most important thing is how well the town does, because if the setting he is going to do goes wrong, then the city will end up being killed by the citizens. With this in mind, Choy decides to come up with a plan for the first line of action, but he's suddenly interrupted by someone else. He turns around to see who's there, and is shocked to see a stranger greeting him. He hasn't met Kang Jaiwoo before, so he doesn't really know her. But even despite that, we can see that there's something quite different about the girl because she's now a level 5 character in the game. Either way, Choy frantically flips through the pages of the demonic book to figure out who she is, but he doesn't get any information right away. Flustered, he asks her how she even got to the top of the tower, and the girl casually replies that she climbed up like normal. While he's expressing his shock, Jaiwoo is more interested in flirting with him. She leans in closer, telling him that she thought he'd be crying since he's been isolated, but then figures that he's probably already used to it. He has no idea what she's talking about, so he asks her what she means. But instead of giving a clear answer, she just feigns ignorance, and tells him that she'll have to come again to give him an answer. Choy is even more confused because this strange lady is talking about seeing him again when she hasn't even told him why she came to see him in the first place. All of a sudden, she leans closer to him again and teases him about not being able to get the answers from his book, which makes him wonder if the information from the item doesn't contain data from the mind. Hearing this, Jaiwoo claims that it's good that way and then grabs her rope to get back down. But before leaving, she tells him that she just wanted to see his face, adding that it's the face of the idiot who had the power to dominate the entire city, but still chose the hard path. After making this statement, Jaiwoo swings down the tall building like a maniac, leaving Choy quite worried, confused, and a bit frightened at the same time. Several hours after the crazy lady leaves, Choy remains at the top of the tower, and by sunset, another announcement is made by the system informing everyone that the city's XP has increased. It is now being labeled as a level 1 city, and as such, the citizens' conveniences will now be improved. They all get new features like status window customization, friend addition, and access to text messages. On top of that, the city's infrastructure will be partially recovered as well. Meanwhile, at the top of the tower, Choy reads the book to fully understand how the city's XP increases when the citizens spend more points. He starts to feel a little guilty when he realizes that the points he received won't contribute to the city's experience at all. This also makes him curious as to where all of his points went, and his best guess is that they went to Krasina. The thought of this makes him wonder if it's okay for him to still be using the book. Elsewhere in the city, we see Kon begrudgingly accepting his second lieutenant badge as he trains with a unit, and Jaiwoo the stalker who's quietly watching admits that the soldiers aren't doing bad either. So she starts to wonder where she could fit into to be most comfortable because she sees herself as a fragile citizen. However, she's not as weak as she lets on because this so-called fragile citizen knocked out 2 soldiers to get to her stalking post. Sometime later, while Choy is chilling in solitude, an announcement is made that confirms the start of another turn, and that they've now arrived in the God of Gold's trapped space. For this mission, the city has been captured by the God of Gold, and if they don't satisfy him, then the game will be over. Apart from that, the God of Gold's creed is level 2. There are maps, and the mission would last for a lengthy period of 2 weeks. When Cone sees this time duration, he realizes that there's a flaw in his master plan because he didn't think the units would change. Despite this issue, their mission is to find the treasure in the summon map and return it to the city to satisfy the God of Gold. Seeing the announcement, the citizens start to talk about how long the time is, and they also wonder where the monsters will be summoned. Eventually, some of them conclude that they will all get a common reward regardless of who finds the treasure, but unfortunately, that is most definitely not the case. Another announcement follows immediately, informing them that there will be common rewards in the mission and that all individual rewards will be determined by the amount of satisfaction each citizen provides the God of Gold. Seeing this, Hayeju is just as worried as the rest of the civilians, especially because she feels the mission has too many descriptions. As such, she decides to skip the long terms and just blasts off into the sky to see the maps for herself. Meanwhile, at the top of the tower, Choy feels delighted that their player is very lucky when rolling the dice, and he feels that it's only a matter of time before they complete the first level of the city build-up plan. He decides that he'll use the book until then, and then find a way to get rid of it afterward. But the moment he says that, a hand wielding a sword suddenly emerges from the pages and stabs him in the chest. Choy is horrified by the attack, but in the blink of an eye, the sword disappears. He's still trying to figure out what just happened when he receives a message informing him that the last mission's sacrifice of sovereignty was 0. And then another message appears revealing that he'll be punished by the Demon King for laziness. Before he can even see the message, he starts to suffer excruciating pain inside his chest. And to make matters worse, he's informed that the pain will continue, and his HP will keep decreasing until he offers more sacrifices to Krasina. Choy groans in agony due to the insane pain, but while he's rolling on the floor, the system just informs him that if he doesn't make any sacrifice before his HP reaches 0, then he'll die, and the Demon King's book will find a new owner. We see a view of the enclosed city from space along with the new map that just appeared beside it for the next mission. It appears to be some kind of forest, and when the scene shifts, we see that the citizens have already traveled to the place. They find themselves standing in front of some kind of cave, which they identify as a newly found dungeon for the mission. We also find out that this mysterious forest they're standing in is called Sector A, the jungle. From the look of this dungeon, the citizens who have now become adventurers assume that it's probably an unregistered dungeon. After knowing this, the leader of the gang is delighted and informs them that it means the place is all theirs to devour. One of them, wearing a witch hat, looks into his status window and asks the leader if it would be okay to report the location of the dungeon to the army because he feels that they might take 50 points each from the leader. You can tell he doesn't like that idea, so he points out that if they inform the army, all they'll have left is chump change. While making his point, he slowly unsheathes his sword from behind his back, and as he does, we see that it's no ordinary blade. The cocky dude possesses a hero-grade one-handed sword called the Right Black Flame Dragon, and this weapon has very impressive qualities to match its power, commanding a unique design. For starters, it has medium fire damage. But when equipped with the right hand, it adds extra damage to its attack, and on top of that, when it's equipped with the left White Ice Dragon, the damage attribute is way more. The guy lifts the sword in the air and encourages his team to make history with him. Now that they're in the other world, it turns out that this party of 4 is called Kangs and Roses, with the leader being Kang Doyop, a level 3 character in the game. While they're excited to explore this dungeon, the scene shifts, and we see a dark ominous creature not far away emerge from the dungeon. Kang senses the presence of the creature, and informs the others that something is coming, suggesting that it must be the gatekeeper. With a wide smile on his face, he grips his sword and prepares for a fight, while the mage standing beside him says that the pattern is so obvious, he feels confident that they'd be able to defeat any enemy that comes their way. So he pumps up the other members, reminding them that they used to be attack squad leaders and guild masters, and as such, this new world should be nothing but a playground for them. However, before he can finish, he's interrupted when the presumed creature turns out to be Choy dragging out a huge sack of diamonds and treasures. He drags the sack out with all his might, and the veins on his face pop out to show just how much effort he is putting in. Through his struggle, he informs the shocked party members that the boss of the dungeon is Choy. Hearing this, the adventurers are immediately disturbed, and as they start to freak out, Choy continues to tell them everything about the monster. Like the fact that its weakness is the lightning attribute and the fact that it uses poison, which means that having an antidote is a requirement for the mission. Unfortunately for Kong and his party, they don't like hearing spoilers about a mission because they know that getting info from him would send all their rewards to Krasina again. They all try to cover their ears and yell at Choy to stop talking, but Choy just goes on and on about what happened in the dungeon. He proceeds to tell them how surprisingly fast the monster is and how the tankers would need to protect the healers and mages in the group. On top of that, he starts telling them about a hidden room inside the dungeon. While he's saying this, Kong and his team start to notice the crazy look of lunacy on Choy's face, which is very scary. But rather than being scared, the adventurers are just enraged because of his spoilers, so they continue to curse at him like they've been doing a lot recently. Elsewhere, back in the city, which looks less run down at the moment, and inside a tall building with the name Harleton on it, we meet an angry man venting out his frustration because he can't believe that they became sacrifices of sovereignty on the first day of the mission. The guy keeps ranting about how their situation isn't fair and how they have to do something about Choi Yul. This angry guy is Khan from earlier, and he's currently very mad because Choy gave them information about the mission from his book, which automatically made them sacrifices of sovereignty to Krasina. His temper tantrum is suddenly interrupted by Mr. Glasses in the group, who reminds him that there's pretty much nothing they can do about a guy at max level and a mythical weapon. Seeing that they're already out of the mission, the little guy suggests that they just call it quits and lay low till the next mission. It turns out that there's a place called the Sacrifices of Sovereignty Camp where citizens are forced to go after receiving information about missions from Choy. Judging by the large number currently in there, it's safe to say that he is going on a rampage with his unwanted information. One of the other people in the camp approaches the two party members and asks them where Choy got them. They tell them that it was in the jungle area. Another guy chimes in, telling the group that his encounter was at the canyon. The stranger who started the conversation says that, in their case, Choy had the face of a demon, and the party leader says that those are Choy's true colors. Kong recalls the encounter with Choy and reveals that the guy literally said that he wants the sacrifices of sovereignty to be spread for him. He confirms that he indeed had the face of a demon, and seeing his terrifying glowing eyes, Kong almost soiled his pants. After that, he tells them that he initially thought about ignoring the sacrifice of sovereignty situation and just go find the treasures. But when he remembered that Choy would also be benefiting from their success, he decided to return to the isolation camp with his friends. Hearing this, another person at the camp tells him that he's right, reminding everyone that they can't just let Choy keep manipulating them like puppets. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Choy chilling along as usual and looking very miserable too. A notification appears in front of him, informing him that the registered count of the sacrifices so far is over 2,400. He's also informed that Krasina is a bit satisfied and, as such, the punishment has also lessened a little. After this message, the demonic book legit laughs at him, but Choy is too relieved to even care because he can finally bear the pain at least at this point. He starts to wonder what on earth the Demon King's punishment even is because there's no such information in the book. He's finally realizing that the book doesn't have all the information about itself. And he already anticipated something like this to happen. So while the Demon King thinks that he can control him with the punishment, that's not exactly the case because around the end of this mission, he'll find out who the one in control really is. For now, Choy decides to just chill and give a shot at his master plan. He sits on the pile of treasure he's acquired, and that's when we see that he's in the canyon, which is Sector B, also called the Emperor Griffin's Nest. And for a good reason too. While a couple of huge eggs are kept in a nest on top of a rock, the flying creatures hover around the area. This elite monster is the Emperor Griffin, a fantastical creature said to have inherited dragon blood. On top of that, it has a difficulty level of 3, which is increased to 4 when it's fighting inside the nest. All of a sudden, the terrifying mythical creature swoops down with great speed in an attempt to attack him with its razor-sharp talons. But rather than getting flustered or afraid, Choy just sits there completely unfazed. Just when the Emperor Griffin is about to get to him, the scene shifts once more to a place where we see Hayeju stabbing another giant monster called the Rock Troll. This beast has a difficulty level of 2, and it's evolved to adapt to the canyon environment. But unfortunately, it's not enough to save it from Hayeju's wrath. As she attacks the troll, she remembers what the Goblin Sword Master told her about how power isn't meant to be controlled but instead allowed to flow through one's body to choose its own course. With this teaching etched in her mind, she swings her spear with incredible force to decapitate the rock troll in one attempt. As the headless beast collapses to the ground, Hayeju quietly thanks the master for his teachings because she's now become stronger than she used to be. Truly, she now looks a lot more menacing than she once was and also appears to have a lot more control over her firepower. While she's distracted, Jaiwa proceeds to go through the treasures in the chest. So when Hayeju sees her snooping through her reward, she confronts her as politely as she can. However, the stalker teases her for being so formal about it. So Hayeju flips the switch and bluntly asks her why she's been following her around. Without any hesitation, Jaiwa shamelessly admits that it's because she reaps the most benefits when she's riding Hayeju's coat tail. Hearing this lowly response, Hayeju doesn't even know what to say because Jaiwa is so proud to say it. And while she's still dumbfounded, the stalker points in the direction of the next hotspot where they can acquire treasure. Naturally, Hayeju is a bit reluctant to follow her, but then Jaiwa suddenly puts on her act again by pretending to be a weak, fragile citizen so she can guilt-trip the warrior into following her. The plan works, and Hayeju starts to feel sorry for her. Even though she's not ready to move, she tells the stalker to wait, while she takes care of this treasure. After that, she sends a text to her Uncle Wongi along with the coordinates of the treasure, asking him to come get them. As the two ladies walk through the canyon, Hayeju notices the small bag Jaiwa is carrying and points out how little she took from the treasure chest, even when she stalked her the whole day. In response, Jaiwa tells her that she prefers quality over quantity. Because she knows that one can't tell the value of a treasure until it's taken back to the city and appraised, she explains that it's the reason she only grabbed the attracting stuff. At this point, Hayeju is a bit confused because she doesn't know how the stalker can even tell that she's taking the most valuable items. But Jaiwa just vaguely tells her that she can tell by using her eyes. Hearing this, Hayeju realizes just how strange the girl is, but for some reason, she finds it seal. They continue their journey, and Jaiwa asks Hayeju about her friends. Surprisingly, she replies, saying that she got rid of the monsters on her way to the canyon. Suddenly, the strange lady tells Hayeju that she has no idea what the mission is really about. She tells her that the monsters aren't the enemy this time and that it's not the peaceful treasure hunt she thinks it is. Hayeju's eyes widen in realization as Jaiwa tells her that they're in an all-out individual battle because there's no common reward. It's at this moment that she starts to break it down for Hayeju, explaining that since the treasures aren't valued until they're appraised in the city, some people might get the nasty idea to attack people and steal their treasures. Since it's easier than fighting the monsters, the fear comes to pass. As the next thing we see is a band of thieves attacking Hayeju's uncle at the canyon to take the treasure from him. While that's happening, the scene shifts back to the city, and we see that an investigation is underway at Gag Hotel. Soon, the senior detective, Seo Yunseok, a level 14 citizen, and Kang Duik, a level 6 citizen, arrive at the scene to find out that it's another case of stolen treasure. The nervous officer looks up at the huge detective, Seo, and explains that the victim apparently blacked out during the appraisal and woke to find his treasure gone. Hearing this, Seo suggests that they should have handed the treasure straight to the god of gold, and Duik agrees, pointing out that appraisal takes a long time. After all, he says that the system takes between 1 to 12 hours to complete the process, giving thieves enough time to steal the treasures. Even though it's quite true, Seo gets annoyed that Duik would interpret it as the system wanting the treasures to be stolen. But the latter insists that it's the most human-like interpretation. The two big men engage in a standoff, and the scared officers start to wonder who Duik really is to be bold enough to stand up to Seo while they're pondering. One of them spots Choy, and before the others can understand what's happening, he crashes into the hotel room on the back of the Emperor Griffin. Before Choy can say anything, Seo covers his mouth and prepares to punch him with his Fungbak's glove, a legendary class equipment, which is one of the 3 divine relics of the old dynasty containing the power of the wind god. Seo punches him out of the building, and then Duik orders the officers to send out a Choy alert before evacuating the people in the hotel. After they leave, he admits that Seo's occupational habit is worthy of respect for going up against Choy, even though his gear and level put him at a disadvantage. He also wishes that Choy would kill him in the fight. However, when we see Seo and Choy outside, Choy is literally smiling as he takes the punches, and the detective becomes worried when he sees that the guy isn't even dodging or looking surprised. So he starts to wonder what on earth Choy could be scheming this time around. It turns out that he was actually planning something very big, because the next thing we see is that there is unrest in the city, and people are texting each other about the latest news. Looks like he did something very unexpected. For some reason, Choy allowed himself to get arrested and even went into questioning without resistance. While some people are starting to see him in a different light, saying that he might not be so bad after all, others insist that it's all part of his master plan so that he can throw them under the bus again. And then there are those who can't even believe that he just turned himself in to be jailed. Regardless of all the arguments and speculations, the citizens all agree on one thing, and that's the fact that this is the chance for them to finish a mission without his interference. So with great excitement, they all grab their weapons and get to work, because they know that they have to earn as much as they can while Choy is gone. The excitement is so great that one guy even forgets that he's not in the One Piece franchise for a moment. But while everyone in the town is happily seeking out treasures, the god of gold looks down on them with rage. The scene shifts to another sector on the map called the Goblin Village, and we see that the motivated citizens have laid siege to the place, slaughtering all the goblins in sight so that they can acquire the treasures. One of the soldiers uses a heroic class axe called the Owl Warrior's Tomahawk, a weapon awarded to the best warrior of the Night Owl tribe, and it also doubles as a boomerang. The user turns out to be a level 3 citizen, Wang Minwo. After he claims to have cleared the path with the weapon, his partner Li Wujin snaps at him for not doing the job well because the goblins are escaping. So he decides to clean up the mess himself by using his heroic class bow called the Elfrin's Pride, a weapon that belonged to Elfrin, the elf species hero, until she disappeared. Wujin shoots at the goblins with his arrows, but even though he takes some of them down, one of them gets away. Seeing this, Minwo starts talking about how the gun would have been better to take them all out. But his partner insists that the bow and arrow is the best equipment in fantasy. While they're arguing, the last goblin laughs at them while running away. But that doesn't happen for long because the soldiers have the sergeant on their team. Before the taunting goblin can know what hit him, his head is blown off by the sergeant in question with the sniper. However, it's not the sergeant we once knew, because this guy is a different person named Park Seonkyu, a level 5 citizen. After gunning down the monster, he vows that the 2 idiot soldiers on the field are going to run 10 laps around the drill once they get back to base. This strict soldier happens to be wearing magical class clothing called the Overcoat of Wanderer, which helps him stay unnoticed by monsters and makes him resistant to cold and heat. While this platoon commander is still sitting in the tree, his men inform him that they've cleared the outer region. Elsewhere, we see a level 20 cone reporting back, telling him that he's almost done with his region. While all of that is happening, we see one of the remaining goblins performing a ritual to summon their god because he believes that once the god arrives, none of the humans can survive his wrath. The guy is still making threats when Kone's partner gets bored and decides to blast the goblin with his explosion ring, a magical class accessory that allows him to use magic explosions. The owner of the ring is a level 3 citizen named Kim Kwang-soo, and as he activates the ring, Kwan covers his ears in anticipation of the massive blast. In a matter of seconds, the goblin and its shrine are blown up. And even though Kone is a little concerned that they shouldn't attack an enemy while transforming or summoning, he reminds himself that they're soldiers and not anime characters. Afterward, he and his partner stand in front of the deep crater that appeared because of the blast, feeling accomplished. Meanwhile, another soldier meets up with the platoon commander to inform him that they've found the target. He tells him that it's the 18 citizens who went missing and that they need backup because most of them are heavily injured. The request reaches the military commanding headquarters back in town, and the boss there agrees to send backup along with the construction unit because the army intends to make the goblin village their outpost. After confirming those details, the boss turns to Kone and reveals that he heard about Choi's arrest. So he asks the former sergeant if he knows his plans. Kone denies knowing anything about it. He does say that the scary thing about Choy isn't even the demonic book. Rather, he feels that it's Choi's brain that's so scary because of how he can take in so much information and still know what to do with it. He explains that it's difficult to predict the moves of someone like Choy, but what he can assure the boss is that Choy is not their enemy. Meanwhile, we see Emperor Griffin sobbing outside the police station. As the massive creature lies there waiting patiently for its new master, the officers are terrified and shocked that Choy could tame such a beast. Speaking of Choy, he's inside the interrogation room gobbling down a hot bowl of soup like he hasn't eaten in days. Dong-suk tries to make small talk, teasing him that a maxed-out person still gets hungry. But Choy isn't in the mood for that, so he assumes his bad cop role and gets right into business. The impatient detective informs him that he's been accused of robbery, fraud, and murder. But surprisingly, Choy accepts all the allegations. Seo is shocked to hear this, but then he reveals that he's been in the field for 20 years and claims that he can identify a criminal just by looking at him. However, after looking at Choy, he shocks everyone in the room by stating that he isn't a bad person. He goes on to say that everything that has happened to him since the start of the game was by accident. While he stares at him in disbelief, Duik suggests that this is the perfect time for the Good Samaritan law, a type of law that allows those who harmed others to go through goodwill to avoid punishment. Detective Seo commends Choy for turning himself in and promises to do his best to undo the misunderstanding the citizens have about him. But after a brief pause, he responds, telling them that he didn't come to the station to seek their help. Seo is shocked to hear this, but before he can even ask any questions, an officer barges in with urgent news. He claims that it's an assault case, but the perpetrator has heroic class equipment, which is making it difficult to apprehend him and all the other people engaging in such crimes. The scene shifts all of a sudden, and we see the detectives in a speeding bus inside. Duik talks about how there are missions that don't have common rewards, and he claims that this is how it should have been from the start so that there would be chaos for a new order, a new world, and brand new powers. Seo hears the crazy statement, and calls him a piece of shit before advising him to start thinking like a sane person. As the big guy puts on his powerful gloves, he admits that he doesn't understand the whole otherworldly stuff but knows that he's still human and doesn't care what kind of world they're in. All he knows is that arresting people who act wrongly should be the sole mission of a police officer. It doesn't take long before Seo catches the perpetrator and knocks him to the ground before informing him that he's been arrested for robbery, assault, and attempted murder. After telling him all of this, the scary detective warns the culprit that it's going to get rough if he resists, right before crushing the notorious heroic class equipment with his gloves. The terrified criminal surrenders. Seo escorts him to the bus, but while one detective is determined to serve justice, the other is more interested in power. Before getting on the bus, Duik suddenly tells Seo that Earth's laws no longer have meaning and then suggests that they team up to become the city's kings, claiming that it won't be so hard with his help. Hearing this, the good cop smiles before telling Duik that it's the reason he's keeping him by his side, especially since he's the most dangerous man in the city. Duik ponders his statement, and concludes that he's no longer the worst guy in town because of Choy. He can't read Choy's mind because he doesn't understand why he turned himself in a day after the mission started. Suddenly, while he's thinking about that, he realizes something. So he tells Duik that he feels they're going to be busy henceforth. The big guy doesn't understand, so Duik explains that since Choy is under arrest, it's the golden chance for the people to act. Seo finally gets what he's trying to say and concludes that it would lead to the city turning into a mess. However, he finds it hard to believe that Choy planned for the city. While Seo is trying to defend, Duik ignores him and thinks about how Choy wanted to make the people act but also predicts what would happen after that. The crafty man finally concludes that the people will hide from Choy again once the next mission starts. And while he's sitting there, a notification from the system appears, confirming that his stamina is decreasing, and that the Demon King's punishment is in progress because Krasina is feeling unsatisfied and wants more sacrifices. A hero-rank tool called the Monkey King's Tail Hair. It's a single strand of yellow glowing hair, locked in a small bottle, and apparently, it's from the tail of a stone monkey who became a god. This strange yet rare tool is said to allow the user to create their own alter ego, and that's exactly what Choy just did. As the smoke clears, we see a perfect clone of Choy standing right in front of him. Immediately after that, he wears a strange cloak, telling the clone to do a good job as his stand-in. Before he leaves the cell, he tells his clone to last as long as he can before getting caught, and that's when we discover that the strange hood Choy is wearing is actually a legendary rank cape called a phase transition cape. The legendary item is a magic-like scientific product that allows him to escape the interference of the material world. A while later, Choy is completely gone, and his alter ego is left alone in the cell, seeming as though he's still dormant. Eventually, one of the officers comes into the cell, screaming at him to hurry up and asking why he's taking so long to get out. The clone still looks sleepy at this point, and as he turns to look at the angry cop, he suddenly becomes afraid, thinking that Choy is taking so long because he's trying to make him a sacrifice of sovereignty. At that moment, the officer shrugs off the feeling of fear and summons the courage to tell the clone that he and his colleagues are determined to remain in charge at the station, even if he makes them sacrifices. Cop makes this bold statement, and as the other officers back him up, he challenges the clone to try and sacrifice them to the Demon King. These cops show their fear when Choy's clone fearlessly marches out of the cell. But rather than accepting the angry cop's challenge, he just quells the tension by suggesting that they should head down to the special isolation ward they prepared because he wants to sleep outside the station. The Emperor Griffin is chirping and screeching for some strange reason. But before the officers can figure out what's going on, it takes to the sky, leaving them very confused by its behavior. While they're standing there confused and regretting not taking a pic of the mythical creature, we see Choy reappearing on the Griffin's back as it soars through the sky. It turns out that his legendary cape allowed him to turn invisible so he could take off with the Griffin without being seen. While riding the beast, he scrolls through his status window and confirms that the first stage of his plan is complete since the citizens have already started to move. With this in mind, Choy decides that it's time to move on to the next stage of his master plan. It's been 4 days into the mission, and by now, the civilians have been divided into 2 categories. The outers who go out of the city to search for treasure like Kon, Hayeju, and Jiwoo, and then there are the inners like Detective Seo and Duik who are in charge of what goes on inside the city. Now, citizens are free to choose either of the 2 roles, and those who have no battle abilities have now found ways to survive. So as a result, the mission seems as though it's going smoothly. The scene changes, and we see the jungle sector outpost, which was formerly the Goblin village before the army took over the place. At night, Cone stands outside thinking about how the soldiers managed to complete an outpost of this scale in only 2 days. It makes him feel that the other-world version of humans is quite scary. It turns out that in this jungle sector, the humans are stronger than normal, and as such, Cone believes that if they all cooperate with such power, they'll be able to complete the mission with ease. However, there's a problem, and it's because the vibe back in the city isn't good at the moment. The reason for the unrest is that there have been more and more crimes because of the treasures, including scamming, robbery, and even pickpocketing. Even though the police are trying their best, Cone knows that it's going to be hard for them, especially because they don't have enough manpower or even equipment. The sergeant recalls the time he spoke with the boss who's based in the military headquarters and remembers asking if the army should make a move. However, the boss tells him it was a dangerous idea because he knows that it never ended well when the military filled the roles of the police. He insists that until the police officers ask for their help, they should just stick to what they've been doing. And even if the request for help comes, he says that they'll just move in the direction of supporting the cops. In conclusion, Cone is informed that the military cannot take leadership of the public order, and this makes him realize that even if the world changes, the bitter truth remains that humans. Later that night in the city, we see another heinous crime underway, and this time it's a guy sucking the life out of another citizen. The perpetrator has a dark cloud over his head, and he's currently using a deadly weapon to poison his victim. This weapon is a mythical rank orb called the Abandoned Magic Pearl, which is implanted in his hand and was thrown away by the Ambulh who had been working hard to become a dragon right before he transformed into the beast. The orb is a growth-based equipment, so the more it's used, the more powerful it becomes, and on top of that, it can create a variety of poisons as well as manipulate them. Everything about the mysterious villain is kept secret, so we don't even know his name or level. As the power of the orb surrounds him, he says to himself that he's not ready to kill his victim because he still has many poison combinations he would like to try out. Hearing this, the injured man gets even more terrified, so he begs for his life and even offers to give the villain all of his treasures if he lets him go. Unfortunately, this cruel mystery guy is not the type to show mercy, so he stretches out his hand with the orb to attack again. And while doing this, he tells his victim that experience is the biggest treasure. At this point, the guy on the floor knows that he's a goner, so all he can do is scream in terror as the poisonous villain sends another deadly blast his way. The poison transforms into a huge nightmarish fog that terrifies the injured man, and it instantly covers the entire area. But not long after, a familiar gloved fist appears out of nowhere and punches through the ominous fog. When the dust clears, we see that it's Seo and Duik who have arrived at the scene. Seo takes a look around and realizes that the weapon being used is a CBR, short for chemical, biological, and radiological. Duik confirms it and comments that it's a very convenient weapon too. The bigger cop says that the place they report came from is just around the corner, and while they're both looking around, they're suddenly shocked to see the poison victim lying on the floor. Without skipping a beat, the two detectives rush over to the guy to check on him and realize that he's already unconscious. However, that's not the strangest thing they notice because they quickly realize that the killer didn't even touch the treasure. They also confirm that the victim is still alive, and this makes Seo even more confused because now he's not sure if the crime was committed by one bastard or if it was done by a group. Regardless, it seems like something very dangerous has emerged in the city, and it becomes even more glaring when they turn around to see a pile of many other people in the same position as the first victim they found. While looking at the mountain of poisoned men groaning in agony, Duik suddenly realizes that after Choy disappeared, another demon king must have replaced him in the city and is now wreaking havoc. Hearing this, Seo starts to remind his partner that he told him Choy wasn't a bad guy, and the latter finally and begrudgingly agrees with him. Regardless of his little win, the bigger detective admits that the whole problem started because of Choy, and this makes Duik a bit surprised because he never expected Seo to agree with him on anything. With this in mind, the huge cop decides that he needs to have a deep conversation with Choy, and the craftier one among the two asks him if he thinks that Choy is going to tell him what he's thinking. Seo responds, admitting that he doesn't expect Choy to open up to him, and that's why he concludes that at times like these, he'll need to question those around him, like Hayeju and Kon. While the detectives are planning a way to find out what's on the mind of Choy, we see he's still riding the Griffin through the cold night. Choy even starts sneezing. He can't believe it because he knows he's at max level. But then, a notification appears informing him that the God of Gold's satisfaction level is just above 6%, which is insanely low. Seeing this, Choy is disappointed that it's still not high even after several treasures are being appraised in the city. But even though he feels very bad about it, he accepts the fact that there's no helping it, so he keeps riding the magical beast until they approach the desert sector of the map. The Emperor Griffin chirps in exhaustion as they enter the windy desert, and as it lands on the sandy dunes, Choy expresses his relief that they've finally arrived at the destination. The magical beast drops him off there before instantly taking to the sky again. And as it flies out of the scene, he commends the Griffin, telling it to get some rest and assuring the magical creature that he'll be back soon. Then we see him sitting on the huge ball of treasures, tightly wrapped in a very large piece of cloth. He thinks about how it won't matter how hard the citizens work to collect treasures because he has already taken all the valuable treasures and kept them out of the reach of the other civilians. The next thing we see is Choy standing in a place filled with gold and other treasures. It's so much that Choy is literally swimming in gold, and as he walks around the place, he talks about something that eats a lot and grows quickly. This special creature that practically vomits gold nonstop turns out to be his very own god of gold, but it is still just a baby, so it needs lots of love and care. Meanwhile, back at the military outpost in the jungle sector, Corporal Lu Wujin, Corporal Huang Minwo, and Private Kim Kwangso are all sobbing before their platoon commander, assuring him that they can take care of everything while he's away. It turns out that Kon is the one they're referring to, and when he sees the grown men crying like schoolgirls, he's a bit disappointed. Either way, he's in a hurry, so he just tells them to quit being so dramatic and reminds them that he won't be away for long since he's only going to the city to give a statement about Choi Yul. After that, he gets in his truck and zooms off while the childish soldiers he left behind playfully asks him to bring back ice cream and lots of snacks too. Kon probably didn't expect them to be competent and responsible while he's away, but the fact that they never even plan to act mature in his absence is quite funny. The moment his vehicle is out of sight, the three goofballs wait for a while to confirm that he's gone. And once they do, they initiate the next stage of their plan, which is to party and celebrate like they're on vacation. While the men-children are jubilating, Sergeant Park Seonki sees them. And even though he doesn't approve, he decides that one day off won't be so bad, especially since it's almost time for a large-scale dungeon raid. So he feels that their little party will help them loosen up a bit. The merry men notice their vice platoon commander scowling at them, so they invite him to join them, suggesting that they enjoy some K-pop female idol medley for the next 5 hours. But Park isn't interested one bit. Rather, he's more worried about the platoon commander because he's all by himself. And he contemplates going to meet Kon, but when he hears the soldiers talking about having combative fun and drinking themselves into a stupor, he decides that they're too stupid to be left alone. The scene changes, and we see a familiar green hand using a special power to blast Choy till he falls to the ground. As Choy falls into the dirt, the Goblin Sword Master tells him that it's all over, revealing that he's picked up his pressure points, which should make his pain less now. He gets up feeling a lot better, and thanks his green friend for helping him out. But the samurai admits that his power can only decrease the pain, and can't get rid of it. However, Choy is more than satisfied with that, so he thanks the goblin again, assuring him that the help so far is good enough for him. Swordmaster Jack has recently accepted his fate as one of the 4 heavenly kings without hesitation, almost as if he's used to things like that happening. So it makes Choy very curious and perplexed. He has so many questions because there's so much he wants to know, but he decides that he's going to ask all of them after the situation has stabilized. At least for now, since Cone is in the city, the sergeant in question is presently sitting in the passenger's seat and taking a look at his status window while one of his soldiers is driving. All of a sudden, he hears someone say that it's time to rob empty houses in the jungle sector. And this makes him alarmed. Private Seokyeong-min, who's in the driver's seat, notices Kwan's sudden mood and asks him if there's any problem, wondering if he needs to use the restroom. However, he doesn't say anything, and after a brief pause, he suddenly pulls out his gun, telling him to turn the car around. He doesn't understand what's going on at first until he yells out to him, revealing that it's an ambush. The moment he says this, several explosions start to go off around the speeding vehicle, and we see 2 citizens responsible for the attack. One of them uses a magic class item called a mana potion, which allows the user to recover small lost amounts of mana energy. While the guy is gobbling down the potion, he yells for his partner to keep attacking, so she doesn't hold back and continues to fire blasts at the truck using her magic class tool called the Low Magic Wand, which allows the user to use 1 to 3 magical attacks at once. As the private tries her best to maneuver the explosions and blasts, Cone starts to wonder if the magic-using duo has lost their mind because he can't believe that they'd have the guts to attack the military. Unfortunately, he realizes that he can't do much because he knows that it'll be chaos if he retaliates against civilians. As Seokyeong-min continues to swerve all over the place, Cone asks him if he can run from the attackers long enough for them to get back up, and he assures him that he can. The private drifts and turns like it's a fast and furious movie, and as they gradually evade the pursuers, the sergeant thinks to himself that the crime rate in the city is even worse than he had imagined. He feels that this is the case because the stronger people are out in the field seeking treasure, leaving only cops and non-combat citizens in the city, making the place the best and most conducive environment for criminals. While Cone is thinking about all of this, we see the mysterious ominous poison user from earlier making an appearance again. Just when the sergeant is predicting what would happen if a strong villain appeared, the magic user makes his appearance, confirming Cone's theory that the city would soon become the most dangerous battlefield of all in an instant. The sergeant doesn't notice the enemy appearing until his private informs him that something very dangerous is coming toward them. That's when the platoon commander spots the poisonous villain charging at them. But before they can do anything, they realize that the enemy is way too fast for them. Seokyeong-min drives fast as hell, but it's not enough to evade the terrifying enemy chasing after them. While Cone and his private are doing their best to survive in the city, we see Choy fighting with a scary lizard monster with glowing eyes. This mini dinosaur is an elite monster with a difficulty level of 3, and it's called the Abyss Lizard Man. This creature is a lizard man that has been taken over by the Abyss, making his stats greatly increase when inside the demon realm. It turns out that this giant reptile isn't alone in this fight because it has 3 more high-ranking lizard men on its side, making it look like he doesn't stand a chance. However, just when it seems like they're about to overpower Choy, he swings his large sword and lands an insanely powerful blast on the lizard men, causing a massive explosion that practically obliterates them in a flash. After blowing the mean reptiles into oblivion, he admits that the pressure point is really great because his body feels much lighter than before. Swordmaster Jack appears beside him and advises him not to push himself too hard with the skill. But it looks like Choy doesn't want to hear any of that moderation crap. He's more concerned with receiving the reward for defeating the Abyss Lizardmen. A while later, Choy tells his green goblin friend that the place they're in has a very similar aura to the demon realm because all the demons he's seen so far are a lot stronger in the demon realm. We finally get to see the strange place Choy is talking about, and it turns out that it's the Abyss Lizardmen's underground city called Takladum, which has a difficulty level of 2. It also turns out that this underground city is the one that leads to the demon realm, which simply means that demons and monsters would have increased abilities when there. Realizing where they are standing, Choy starts to think of a plan. He knows that the Demon King is also a demon, that's his name after all. So, this means that the Demon King's power will be stronger too, as well as the Demon King's punishment. Because of this, he decides that he'll have to hurry and leave the place with the treasure. Just then, Goblin Sword Master Jack says that they already have enough, but Choy protests, claiming that the important thing isn't to satisfy the god of gold. He then reveals a strange glowing mass to the confused goblin and explains that satisfying the god of gold is just the easiest way to clear a mission and not the only way. Clearing the mission this way also means that the citizens get the minimum number of rewards, and that won't cut it with him because what he wants is to get as many rewards as possible. He suddenly thinks about his friends Second Lieutenant Cone and Hayeju, as well as the chaos happening in the city, and he reveals that they're all part of his master plan to obtain the many rewards he so craves. Meanwhile, back in town, Private Seokhyungmin continues to do his best to escape the thick, dark, evil fog, but it's just too fast for them. And just when it looks like the fog is going to swallow them, Kyungmin steps on the gas, desperate for them to make it out alive. In a flashback, we see the platoon commander being presented with a small box on the table, which appears to be a promotional reward. Cone has no idea what's inside, and that's when he receives a message from the boss telling him that it's a gift for his promotion. He admits that he first got it as a reward for a mission, but he now believes that the new second lieutenant needs it more than himself. The boss also reveals that he provided the soldiers back at the base with good equipment. Hearing all of this, Cone is speechless for a moment, so the battalion commander asks him if he needs anything else. Cone says that there's no problem but admits that he can't get used to an army with enough funding. So, he activates his new gift, a heroic class tool called the Monetary Shelter, which allows him to create a safe area with a range of 3m for 3 minutes, and this duration can also decrease depending on the surrounding environment. Back in the present, we see the platoon commander use this protective shield to cover the moving truck, and while the private is still attempting to be an expert behind the wheel, Cone orders him to stop because they'll get into an accident if they act rashly. All of a sudden, the villain appears on the hood of the truck before taunting Cone by calling him Mr. Army. The platoon commander finds the term neither funny nor threatening, so he just tells the evil creep that he'd like to speak to his leader because minions have no business in this. Hearing this, the villain laughs cynically, commending Cone for being good at insults. The faceless and nameless villain proceeds to launch his attack, saying that he's the leader around and assuring Cone that he isn't interested in hearing what he has to say. Then he tells the soldier to do as he says if he doesn't want to die, and after saying this, he uses his magic orb to spread his poisonous gas all over the place. The fog is so powerful that it begins to melt the car, and the terrified private begins to freak out. Cone isn't sure what exactly this poisonous or corrosive gas is, but what he's sure of is that it's deadly with a wide range and that it could be a slaughter weapon if things go wrong. Regardless, he decides that from now, he has to focus on survival. So, he deactivates the shield and tells the villain that he might surrender if he listens to what he has to say. He finally gets the evil guy's attention, but what he says afterward is incredibly shocking. Cone literally asks the villain to volunteer to become his subordinate. The nameless guy doesn't take that lightly. Enraged, he says that the soldier has lost his mind and decides that he's going to make him more human because he just crossed the line. At this point, it looks like Cone doesn't have any other plan, even his private scolds him for pissing the dangerous guy off. But that's when his plan unfolds because all of a sudden, Seo arrives and blasts the bad guy away with a mini tornado, making it clear that the second lieutenant was just buying time to create an opening for backup to arrive. As the tornado swallows the masked enemy, he begins to wonder if he played too much or took the others for granted. His situation gets even more dire when he realizes that the powerful wind isn't allowing him to control his dark smoke. Even though he has no idea who the person responsible is, he concludes that their compatibility with him is not good. While he's still saying this, we find out that he has another trick up his sleeve when he suddenly pulls out a slingshot. This hero-rank weapon called the Giant Slayer Mk7 is no ordinary slingshot, and it's revealed that it's the weapon of a small boy who killed a giant. Afterward, he used the tendons and bones to reinforce the slingshot, making it insanely powerful. As the masked man loads up the weapon with a black ball of smoke from his magic orb, he admits that he likes the challenge before shooting at the detective below. However, Seo sees the blast coming and underestimates it, thinking that the slingshot is such a childish weapon. Feeling unbothered, he just stands there waiting for the ball to reach him. But before he can get hit, the platoon commander pushes him out of the way. The force from the blast knocks both men to the floor, and as a result, Seo's tornado is dissipated. And the impact of poison even malted road. While they're still groaning and wincing in pain, the soldier in the driver's seat yells at them to get in immediately. However, Detective Seo decides to play the role of hero, so he tells them to go ahead while he stays back to apprehend the criminal. But the moment he says this, Kon says that their enemy might not be alone, assuming that more could arrive in a short while. Hearing this, the committed detective insists that a police officer is never supposed to run away in front of a criminal. But the sergeant tells him to think of their plan as a strategic retreat rather than a cowardly surrender. Despite the advice, Seo remains adamant, saying that there will be many more victims if they retreat. Still, Kon encounters his point by reminding him that it's the same case if he dies right now. The two grown men are still arguing when the soldier in the truck interrupts to inform them that the criminal in question has already disappeared. Truly, when the huge detective and the sergeant turn around, they're shocked to see that the tornado has stopped, and the masked man is gone. The scene shifts elsewhere in the city, and we see several explosions rocking the outside of a building. Two of the civilians are sitting on their butts after being knocked down by someone. As the surroundings continue to blow up, they sit there dazed and confused. That's when we see the person who knocked them down. Seeing her, they both ask Hayeju why she is even around, especially since they thought that she had other things to do. All of a sudden, they get up from the floor so they can run away. Even though one of them feels concerned about their quota, the other reminds him that they won't be able to do it if Hayeju is their opponent. As they bolt away, Hayeju yells at them to stop there and waits so they can talk. But rather than doing this, one of them throws a bottle at her. She's quite confused when she sees this, and while she's still trying to figure out what the guy had in mind, her uncle standing behind her shouts that it's poison. Hayeju's eyes pop out in horror when she hears this because if the bottle breaks, then everything is over. In an incredible display of speed and agility, she catches the bottle with her spear before it can hit the ground and then raises it into the air to grab it with her hand. Seeing this, the old man sighs in relief and admits that it's such a good thing this city has someone like her. However, she's not in the mood to entertain any form of flattery and instead is more focused on finding out who the two guys that threw the bottle were. The old man, Hayeju's uncle Wongi, responds that he doesn't know who the guys are but assumes that they must have been the occasional robbers. Even though he has never seen such an organized heist before, he also says that quite a lot of people suffered from their poison because it's a deadly kind that most antidotes don't work for. To make matters worse, he informs her that they probably lost the treasures she gave the citizens of the city. Hearing all of this, Hayeju feels very bad, thinking about how some humans are even worse than monsters. Eventually, she decides to tell her uncle to stop the search for treasures in the meantime, and this shocks the old man. However, even though it's not an easy decision, Hayeju feels that it's the right thing to do because something about the entire city just doesn't sit right with her. It's almost as if something bad is surrounding the city. Elsewhere, we see the clone of Choy sitting by the window of his room in the isolation ward. While the replica is enjoying a book, Jae-woo spies on him with a telescope. While most people think that he's the real Choi Yul, she somehow knows that Choi set up a fake to stay in his place. With a knowing smirk on her face, she takes a bite out of her chips and asks herself what the main character could be up to. Either way, she decides that there's no need for her to stay in the city if Choi Yul is around. The reason she feels this way is that she knows that something no one could have imagined is about to happen to the city. The scene changes, and we see the real hero telling the Green Samurai that a big fight is about to break out. As he continues to read the demonic book, Swordmaster Jack asks him if he intended for it to happen. In response, Choy reveals that he actually planned for chaos to ensue within the city but also admits that he never expected someone so crazy to appear as a result. Both of them walk along a dark path covered in the blood of slain dragons, and the goblin suggests that Choy should just slice down this crazy troublemaker. However, Choy says that he can't just do that, and the reason for this is that he believes he needs something even more chaotic. Hearing this pretty crazy thought, Swordmaster Jack points out how hard it is to read his thoughts. Choy laughs when he hears this and assures his green friend that he'll understand everything soon enough. But in the meantime, he suggests that they just focus on clearing the dungeon. It doesn't take long before the two get to the Takladum dungeon's deepest area. Upon reaching there, they're faced by a massive door with two glowing eyes on it. In an instant, the door opens, revealing a blinding light on the other side. Just as that happens, we see an old dragon talking about how long it's been since a human came so far down into the dungeon. This beast is no regular dragon because the huge guy is even sitting on a throne. As he welcomes Choy into his city, it's revealed that he's actually Taklo, the demon king of investigation. An elite demon who situates himself on the border of the abyss where he enjoys watching mortals slowly experience pain for a long period of time. Choy quickly gets to the point by asking Taklo if he knows the demon king Krasina. The demon king of investigation gets pissed off when he hears the tone which the human uses to ask the question. He gets very mad, and as he tells Choy that he doesn't like his tone, his dragon eyes change to a fierce red color. Choy isn't even slightly fazed by this, and in fact, he relishes a fight with the demon king. So he tells the dragon that he'll probably hate his attitude even more. Just as he leaps into the air to attack, unfortunately, he faces a small challenge because just when he's about to land a hit on Taklo, a magic shield appears, and he crashes into it. Seeing this, the Demon King becomes more confident, and even teases Choy by saying that his attitude is truly a mess right before blasting him away. The force pushes Choy back, but he finds his footing to land a few meters away from his opponent. He immediately examines the magical barrier that stopped him and realizes that it blocks all physical attacks as well as counter high-level magic. Immediately, he also examines Taklo and discovers that he's a mage-type demon king, unlike Tumbaba, who is a warrior-type demon king. Choy thinks how it's the polar opposite from 2nd Lieutenant Kone's physical-oriented party, which basically means that Kone and his army would have been annihilated within a second if they had come down to Taklo's lair. It doesn't take long before the dungeon is turned into a battlefield, because Choy and Swordmaster both attack with great force, shooting with everything they've got. But time and time again, the magical barriers continue to block the attack as they pop up out of nowhere. Taklo then hurls a massive fireball at the goblin, but the Swordmaster slashes it with his mighty sword. As the fight goes on, Choy thinks about the countless dangers that are around, aside from the Demon King, from cursed items to plague-smitten monsters. Choy vows to get rid of all the other dangers so that he can reset the difficulty for the entire dungeon. All of a sudden, we see him swinging a massive axe with a chain wrapped around it. This ferocious weapon has a name to match, as it's called Musculus, and it also happens to be a legendary rank axe which has risen to the ranks of the gods because it pushes the body to extreme limits. In other words, it gives the user highly developed muscles, which are no different from magic. And as Taklo sees this, he immediately creates many more magic shields to protect himself, probably because he knows the kind of damage this bad boy can do in proportion to the strength value of its user. All physical attack power is converted to magical attack power by the axe, making it the perfect weapon to face a mage-type demon king like Taklo. With this in mind, Choy prepares to attack, vowing to turn the entire dungeon into a beginner-level stage difficulty for all the civilians. The next thing we see is a massive magical blast from Musculus, one that's sure to take out all of Taklo's puny shields. Meanwhile, back in the city, in the Western Police Station meeting room, we see a very upset Detective Seo Yunseok introducing himself to Kone and Hayeju as the investigator from the homicide sector. He tells them that he initially invited them because of Choi Yul, but says that the situation has now changed because a crazy bastard has appeared in the city. And since they have no idea who he is, they're calling him a Mugi till they get more intel. Duik suddenly chimes in, saying that they need to arrest this Amugi but notes that they can't because it's impossible with their current police force. With that point being made, Seo proposes a collaborative operation between the army, the police, and the capable civilians. Without skipping a beat, Hayeju agrees with the proposal because she knows how dangerous the criminals are. But Kon, on the other hand, doesn't seem too sure about agreeing to it. Meanwhile, the second lieutenant thinks about how irrelevant the fight between the civilians is to the mission. Kon knows that things will only get worse if this goes on, and that even if they win the fight, everyone dies anyway if they fail their main mission. In the end, the fact that this sect of criminals started their mission knowing all of this means that they're confident they will win the fight happening in the city. Even worse, Kon feels that this group of crazy bastards is sure that it can also win the fight against Choi Yul. Scene shifts. A short tale is told by the Demon King Taklo about the countless calls he received that pushed him to burn countless cities, as well as bring pain and death upon countless mortals. For a very long time, not even a single mortal could slice through him. But now, this Demon King is pretty shocked that there's a mere mortal who can slash him with only his power. While Taklo is still struggling to accept this harsh reality, Choy gives him one last chance to fess up before asking him once again if he knows the Demon King Krasina. However, upon hearing the annoying question again, the Demon King of Investigation points out how unrelated it is to the current call. Choy is confused about this term which Taklo keeps using, so he asks him if he's referring to missions as calls. In the surprising twist, the Demon King says that he is, and he goes on to reveal that the monsters and Demon Kings also receive missions based on their respective reasons. As he sits on his throne with a big nasty cut across his chest, Taklo continues to lecture the hero, claiming that these missions usually ask them to destroy the mortals. After making such a provocative joke, he goes on to laugh in an even more annoying manner. The Demon King goes on to inform him that some of them have different reasons for the same call. And just like it is with mortals, these reasons change sometimes. Hearing all of this, Choy is very surprised and baffled too, so he asks Taklo if he's even supposed to be sharing such information with him. However, while Choy seems to think that he shouldn't be told all this stuff, the Demon King of Authority bluntly tells him that it doesn't matter. Teo's eyes begin to glow with a menacing blue color as he says this, and then he goes on to inform Choy that any mortal who holds the demonic book inches closer to their death with every new thing they learn. Hearing this statement, this fearless hero finally concludes that Taklo knows about Krasina and his book after all. Even though Choy confronts him about it, he just laughs mockingly, feeling that it's a shame he won't be able to witness the evident doom that follows Krasina's book. The moment he says this, a massive surge of energy leaves his body as if he's about to self-destruct. And when Choy realizes what's happening, he tries to stop it so he can ask Taklo what he's talking about. Unfortunately, it appears that it's too late, and while he's still yelling at the dragon to tell him what he knows, Goblin Sword Master Jack strongly suggests that they leave the dungeon at once. All of a sudden, the Demon King takes a ghostly form and admits that the end of his call isn't so bitter after all, because at least he managed to see Choy in distress. Choy sees this and starts to freak out, feeling desperate to find out more about Krasina. But as he continues to yell at Taklo to wait, his green companion holds him back to prevent him from going any closer to the blast. The scene changes shortly to the forest above the dungeon before a massive blast erupts from below. The large beam of blue supercharged light goes all the way to the sky from the ground, and then Taklo is suddenly heard saying that he'll wait. But he's not waiting for Choy, rather, he's going to wait for the doom of their city pawn number 8, which he predicts will be infused by Choy. After the Demon King of Investigation makes his grand exit, Choy and his goblin samurai friend mount the Emperor Griffin so they can leave the jungle. As they soar through the sky, Sword Master Jack asks Choy if he's alright, and even though it's quite obvious that he's still very bothered, he just replies that he's good. Choy recalls what Taklo said in his lair about his downfall and how the book in his possession brings upon an obvious doom to everything in its vicinity. Choy ponders on these thoughts in silence, but he's interrupted when the goblin asks him if he wants to collect more information from the book. This time, he says that he doesn't want to, pointing out how there's no need since Taklo is the only Demon King for the current mission. In Choy's mind, finding out that another Demon King knows about Krasina is enough information for him, so he suggests that they just focus on their original goal, which is field difficulty adjusting because the mission will be over in 3 days. Hearing this, the Goblin Sword Master considers the time left, and wonders if his students will be able to survive until then. 3 days later in the city, we see an officer standing in the streets, directing civilians to the safety zones and urging them to stay on the main road because the Ambulh gang is on the loose again. Inside the emergency room of a hospital, the nurse panics as she informs the doctor that they're out of potions and antidotes. When he hears this, he curses out loud in frustration because their situation makes no sense. Rather than casualties from the mission, there are even more emergency cases from the fights among humans, and it's all thanks to the Ambulh gang. Back on the streets, Detectives Seo and Hayeju are currently holding their own against the crazy group, but it's not looking good for them. The masked leader of the gang confidently tells them to just give up, claiming that even two people wearing legendary class equipment can't catch him. Looking at the Ambulh now, it's clear that he's improved a lot with his devastating smoke power. So, it's no surprise that he's gloating fearlessly in front of the city heroes. He tells them to look at the state of the city, and then recalls how the bastards didn't care when the fight broke out because they were more interested in looking for treasures. The masked criminal says that they are only those who hide and try to reap the benefits, all because there's no one to lead the city. He believes that they need an absolute leader to guide the people. After making this point, he says that this position is meant for only the strongest person out of all of them. Hearing this, Hayeju immediately declares that the strongest person is none other than Choi Yul. For some reason, Seo thought he was the strongest, but everyone just ignored his delusions. After Hayeju makes this statement, Ambulh lets out a boastful laugh before claiming that the reason Choy hasn't stepped forward yet is that he's not confident he can defeat him. The masked maniac expresses his disappointment that Choy hasn't confronted him, revealing that he even prepared a present for Choy. Just then, a barrage of bullets is unleashed on him from all angles, but they don't hurt him too much because his dark smoke deflects most of them. However, one of the bullets penetrates and finds its way to his head, and as that happens, we see that it's the second lieutenant who is responsible for this surprise attack. Cone says that the smoke density is high enough to block bullets with automatic defense, so that means that Ambulh will only acquire more skills the more they attack him. The masked criminal unleashes another attack to retaliate, and when the soldier sees this, he realizes that with his rapid growth rate, they have to deal with him before it's too late. The crazy villain jokes, saying he's not like Choi Yul and that he's willing to share all the points. On top of that, he believes that clearing missions is a piece of cake for him, so he urges all of them to listen to his words and automatically say yes to him. Hayeju is the last person who would say yes to the maniac, and while she's standing her ground, Detective Seo begins to form another mighty wind-based attack. The pissed-off policeman sternly tells Ambulh to go out and find treasures since he has that much time on his hands to think about such idiotic things. Seo blasts the mini-hurricane at him, but the masked maniac informs him that the trick doesn't work on him anymore right before returning an even more powerful attack from his magic orb. Both Hayeju and Seo realize that they're in big trouble when they see the ground breaking in front of them. Before they even know what's going on, they're surrounded by several giant snakes made out of dark smoke. In a matter of seconds they're trapped, and even though Hayeju tries to blast her way out, Ambulh informs them that they can't fend off his poison with wind or fire anymore. This psychopath reveals that after he's done covering them in poison, he'll let whoever screams the most live. The scream he wants is already set. However, just when it looks like it's over for the duo, the big detective punches his way out of the trap, leaving Hayeju stunned. She tries to stop him from taking on Ambulh alone since she's at a higher level. She proposed to go first. But he just shuts her up, not minding sacrificing himself. He says that it makes more sense for him to do it, whether by age or career. But again, the masked killer mocks him, claiming that it doesn't. As Ambulh prepares to launch a finishing attack on the already weakened pair, Seo takes his cloth and covers Hayeju, hoping to shield her with his body. Just when it looks like the bad guy might kill them, a huge gust of wind comes out of nowhere to foil his attempts. After it clears, the very frustrated Ambulh yells in anger, wondering who the bastard who interrupted him is. That's when we see that it's the Goblin Sword Master. Seo and Hayeju are both shocked by what just happened, and as the green samurai unsheathes his sword, he admits that he's pretty disappointed in his students for not being able to hold their own against a third-rate criminal. The pair finally realizes that it's their master, and they almost can't believe their eyes. Ambulh is confused because he has no idea why a guardian from the last mission would still be around. Sword Master Jack says to himself that his students need to be disciplined, but he postpones it because the time has come for their plan. While he's saying this, they both look at their status windows to see the emergency notice informing them that another god of gold has been found. We see that this unknown god of gold, which just hit puberty, is ready to jump into the group's pecking order. Elsewhere in the city, the citizens and police are notified that the mission's content has changed. Henceforth, they can now choose which god of gold they would like to offer treasure to until the mission ends. The god of gold that receives the most treasures will win, and on top of that, the citizens of the winning god will receive a great reward. At the same time, the citizens of the losing god won't receive any reward. This new development almost causes Ambulh to lose his mind in frustration. In the isolation camp, Kang and his party members see the new announcement and conclude that Choy must be responsible for it because they're already used to his pattern of doing things. On their status windows, they see that the new god of gold has only one participant in way more treasures, so it's easy to guess who it is. Ambulh is furious when he sees all of this, and while he's flipping out, we finally catch up with Choy. While riding the Griffin, Choy thinks about his plan of creating a villain to unite the city, and while it's pretty obvious, it's also the most definite method. Regardless, he concludes that he just can't leave a role like that to someone like Ambulh, who suffers from protagonist syndrome and acts out by only trusting in his legendary rank equipment. The citizens keep staring at their status windows and refuse to believe that Choi Yul actually turned himself in. One of them, who claims to have studied physiognomy, suggests that Choi even has the face of the villain. Those who are outside the city also see the news that the game is delivered to every one of them, so they hurry to go back into the town. However, one of them stops them, asking if they're crazy and reminding them that the Ambulh is in the city. Another member of the group points out that they're going to lose everything to Choi Yul if they don't head back immediately, and makes it clear that it doesn't matter if the Ambulh is there or even Choi, who they now consider a snake bastard. While those guys are arguing, Choi rides his Griffin back into the part of the city where the masked villain is. The Ambulh is enraged when he sees Choi in the sky and clenches his fists in preparation for another fight. Without any warning, he shoots his purple poison fog at Choi, angrily yelling at him till he and the flying creature are surrounded by the dark mists. All of a sudden, the thick fog starts to take the shape of a giant mouth with sharp teeth that is about to devour the MC. Before Choi can even figure out what's going on, a big flying snake monster formed from the fog shuts its toothed mouth, trapping him and the Griffin inside. Seo and Hayeju are horrified as they watch what just happened from the sidelines, but all they can do is yell and stand there. Meanwhile, within the dark clouds, Ambulh expresses his rage after Choi turns him into a tool. So, he vows to kill Choi. The masked villain pulls out his catapult and aims one of his green poison bombs at him, restating his vow to kill him. Choi is completely unbothered by the threats. As the green ball of destruction flies up to meet the Griffin, Ambulh is shocked to his bones at what happens next. The big flying beast casually swallows the bomb as it's about to explode, leaving the shooter stunned at how it's gobbling up one of his strongest attacks with ease. After Griffin is done, Choi just makes a condescending gesture, implying that he's not impressed at all. At the same time, the flying beast licks its beak after enjoying a tasty weapon of destruction. Apparently, this Emperor Griffin is an elite monster whose main diet just happens to be deadly poisonous monsters, such as the basilisk and the hydra. It's no wonder why this was a piece of cake for the beast, especially when it even has a poison tolerance level of a boss monster. As the creature's eyes glow with a murderous green color, Ambulh is terrified because he doesn't understand how an elite monster could be as strong as a boss. While he's still trying to wrap his head around everything that just happened, Choi instantly lands right behind him and then asks him if he's curious why his poison doesn't work at all. He is startled by Choi suddenly appearing behind him, so he turns around in shock, probably expecting a surprise attack or something. However, the MC just tells him to find out the reason himself, and gives it to him as homework. Choi suggests that he should keep himself busy with the assignment instead of bullying people all over the town. Right after saying that, he delivers the devastating surprise attack that the Ambulh had feared all along. He lands a thunderous slap on the villain's face, one that's so powerful that it even causes an explosion that sends waves all over, to the point that they almost knock Seo and Hayeju to the ground. As the dust and smoke clear, we see Choy, the goblin sword master, and the Griffin standing victorious over the unconscious villain who has finally lost his mask. Just then, Choy yells out, announcing that he will monopolize the Desert of Gold. He warns the people not to offer their treasures to the desert god of gold because then he would make them sacrifices of sovereignty for all the future missions to come. A statement like this attracts several murmurs and grumbles here and there because they already hate him. But that doesn't stop him from doing what's on his mind. It ends by telling them to try their best for the remaining missions and lets out a long villainous laugh, before jetting off with Sword Master Jack on the Emperor Griffin. After hearing this, even Seo and Hayeju seem like they can no longer defend him. The detective just calls Choy a brat, while Hayeju and Kwan look like they're speechless due to the shock. But it turns out that they know something no one else in the city knows because they suddenly start complaining about how terrible Choy is acting. Apparently, Choy also knows this because we see him feeling very embarrassed on Griffin's back while Jack just pats him on the head to comfort him. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the city, we see a crowd gathered at the Military Police Alliance for a treasure search mission urgent meeting. There, Hayeju the speaker informs them that for the next week, they would need to find way more treasures than Choy's god of gold. She states that they would need to cooperate if they want to achieve that. Then, Detective Seo chimes in. He admits that even though they all know Choy is now considered the greatest calamity to befall them, they shouldn't just stay constricted and unable to do anything. The detective reminds them that they need to overcome such calamities the way they would have back on Earth. So he urges all of them to work together because that's the only way they can survive. The white-haired warrior agrees with him in front of them and insists that this obvious method has been the most effective method for humanity to overcome all forms of calamities no matter the generation. Hayeju tells the people that everything concerning Choi Yul, the other world's mission, and even their desire to go back home requires them to work together. The citizens suddenly start to see reason with her, as she charges them to lend their strength to one another to defeat all those calamities. The warrior makes this request with a powerful burst of flames into the air, and the motivated people all cheer, revealing that they're determined to work together. While that breakthrough is ongoing on the streets, the scene changes to a prison cell where the unmasked Amugi is now sitting quietly. He looks at the magic orb in his hand and just balls his fist in rage. Sometime later, we see that the citizens have started their plan with Mission Guide 1, which is City Alley Supply. The first aspect of this mission guide is the nest. This requires using hostile organisms and monsters on the ground as a base. With this, targeting monsters becomes much easier because the forces can be seen with the naked eye. Although the value of the treasure from this method isn't high, there's always a chance they would hit the jackpot from time to time. The second aspect is the dungeon. This is the generic term for buildings, caves, or basements, as their inhabitants cannot be seen fully with the naked eye. Here, they would face some really jacked up monsters, and although the value of the treasure is often high, there are many variables. It's a very risky mission because of the high threat level, which practically makes it forbidden to enter alone. As such, it's recommended that the military and other trained outer enter the place as a team so that they can finish off any threats. Kwan's special squad and their barrage of bullets are up to the task of taking out such monsters. A while later, we see Hayeju's Uncle Wongi taking a record of all the box treasures that have been gathered. He asks one of his men to confirm if they've taken the last of them, and when he's sure of that, he instructs that all the treasures be loaded up in the back of the trucks. As their convoy of trucks is about to complete the journey back home, they're suddenly ambushed by some flying monsters with a grudge. The warriors team up to block the beasts and protect the loot because they're almost at the city now. The soldier stationed at the city entrance orders that the path be cleared for the speeding vehicles, and other civilians with him gladly open fire on the flying monsters to ensure that the treasure gets in safely. Their little operation is successful, and the trucks make it into the city safely, which takes us to the third aspect of the mission guide, the Treasure Appraisal Center. This is the location where treasures are stored during appraisal. So, the military police and private security guards are stationed there together to ensure the safety of the loot. Suddenly, a man yells out, screaming, "It's up!" as he holds some ugly doll, throwing it up in jubilation. This squid-like doll turns out to be the idol of the true god, a legendary rank treasure worth 1,000 points. Even though the doll is made in the shape of a god, it has no special abilities. But he doesn't seem to care, and others around are even jealous of his finding. Meanwhile, inside one of the rooms, the military head calculates their progress as a city so far and is disappointed to see that there's still no difference in the gap between them and Choi Yul. The Choi menace is over 38 million in points worth of treasure, while they're still far behind with just over 300,000. The commander is very bothered that the difference is still so large, especially since he knows that the jungle and ravines have almost been swept completely of treasures. The only locations left to explore include the same desert where Choy is in the last map, which is yet to be revealed to the citizens. These unknown areas are places that they postpone going to because of the tremendous risk involved in exploring them. Regardless of what's happening, there are 3 questions on that military leader's mind. The first is whether Choy will let them pass freely. The second is if they have enough equipment and manpower to even cross the Death Desert. And the third is whether the city's dwindling defense can hold on much longer. After considering all of this, the man smiles and claims that their expedition is now possible. The next thing we see is a shiny strand of hair on a table, which is being examined by Detective SEO and his partner. The big guy looks at the strand in confusion and is baffled to think that that single hair is the Choi they arrested. Duik just laughs in response, admitting that they'd been fooled big time. The smaller detective holds up the strand for closer inspection and comments on how people would not have moved if Choi had taken out the desert god of gold from the onset. Especially because, at that point, most people were already afraid of him. Seo deduces that he used himself as bait to make the people move, and Duik concludes that he did this by causing an outrage that forced them to overcome their fears. This conclusion enrages Seo so much that he smashes the table because he knows that this plan will only make Choi even more isolated from the city. In the end, Duik is dumbfounded after seeing his partner's temper tantrum, but at the back of his mind, he finally realizes what kind of person Choi Yul is. The cunning detective concludes that Choi is the kind of person who doesn't play the card in front of you but one who holds the cards considering how the entire game could go in the long run. Duik feels that if he's right, then the people must unite and strengthen because he knows that Choi must already have held some cards in case the people win. In the end, he also knows that it won't be an obvious card like gather your strength and find treasures elsewhere in the jungle. Jaiwa stands in front of a huge rock with symbols on it, and concludes that it can help her clear the treasure-finding mission for good. The symbols on the rock show the god of gold being killed by the people. So she's sure that she can sell such valuable information for a very expensive price. The scene shifts once more, and the next thing we see is a massive explosion. It turns out that this is the last day of the treasure hunting mission, and Seo is desperately trying to land a deadly blow on Choi. The big detective charges at Choi with glowing eyes and gloves, swinging and missing each time because he's just not fast enough. Choi dodges all the hits until he decides to block one of them with ease just to flex his power a bit. As of now, the puberty desert god of gold has treasures worth over 38 million, and its only participant remains the one and only Choi. He stops Seo's blow and smiles smugly, but then he's suddenly flung into the air by Seo, who reminds him that he's still much lighter in weight even though he's on a much higher level than everyone else. Seo uses his wind power to spin the MC around in the air until Hayeju arrives to deal a devastating blow with her spear. It turns out that the citizens have come a long way from where they first started because now they've gathered a treasure worth over 37 million for the city. This means that they're now very close to surpassing Choi and winning the mission. In a shocking twist, even the Ambulh have teamed up with the city just so they can defeat the greatest calamity to befall them. This was Choi's plan all along, but it's still quite shocking to see them working together like this. Anyway, Ambulh attacks with his poison fog snakes again, and that's about the same time that Hayeju lands an insanely powerful fiery blast on the MC. A very epic battle ensues as Choi dodges all their attacks. It's so impressive how determined they are to keep him busy till the mission ends. These guys throw everything they've got at Choi, but he doesn't make it any easier for them. He dodges all their attacks and even bounces off the snakes to create enough space for him to hurl his giant sword at the Amagi. The poison villain sees the blade hurtling toward him like a meteor, so he uses his magic orb to create a very big blob to slow it down. The time left before the mission ends is just over 24 minutes, and even the people know that it's not enough time to surpass Choy. Choy also knows this, so he smiles smugly and just tells those of the City Alliance to work harder while standing on the giant purple blob-like cube. In a flashback scene from 4 days ago, we see Hayeju visiting the newly arrested Amagi in his cell. She admits that his true identity surprised her because she never expected that he would be a high schooler who's still wet behind the ears. This teenager who gave the toughest detectives in the city a hard time is just a level 24 normal citizen named Kang Sungwon. He proves that he's still a brat when he tells Hayeju that she's being loud and asks her to off, claiming that he'll call if he needs her. She just laughs when she hears the rude kid sputter nonsense, and tells him that her job is to watch over him carefully. Someone tries to provoke her by suggesting that she can't surveil him by herself, especially since she lost during their fight outside. He taunts her, slowly activating his magic pearl, but she just shoves her massive spear in front of his face and assures him that she is faster than his ability to activate his power, teasing that he has the body of a normal human after all. Hearing this, he lets out a short laugh and concludes that she must have heard that from his underlings. With her floating spear still pointed at his face, she confirms this, adding that they all confess so easily, suggesting that he wasn't a very respected leader. Someone just waves off the insult, claiming that he can't blame the survival instincts of weak people who try to live by sticking to stronger people. He's very confident that they'll all lick his feet again once he goes out and steps on them again because he believes that all humans are like that. In response, Hayeju just mocks him, claiming that he must be going through 8th grade syndrome or something. But he just hits back, informing her that his magic pearl is a mythical rank item. Someone believes that the only reason Choy was able to beat him is that his magic pearl is still in development. This kid is so confident that even Choy won't be able to stop him after he's done developing it to the rightful mythical rank. He even adds that the city will be his when he finally does that, and hearing this, Hayeju starts to get a bit worried. She remembers that the city would have been doomed, and everyone would have been in danger if it wasn't for Choi Yul. At this point, she's sure that the arrogant high schooler is a threat. Seeing that his magic pearl isn't even fully developed yet, she wonders if it's a good idea to leave him be. Meanwhile, outside in the city, Jaewook stops to eavesdrop on 2 guys talking about the dungeon. One of them asks how the place was, and the other admits that they barely beat the mission in the end, adding that they'll be able to do slightly bigger dungeons soon. Elsewhere on the street, a citizen receives a message informing him that he'll be fined if he unsheathes a weapon inside the city. Seeing all of this, Jaewook concludes that this is a bad time to sell her precious treasure since it's easier to sell when things are a mess. In just a few days, the place is now a beautiful city filled with fighting spirit, so she can't sell her information for a lot. At times like this, she decides that connections are the best. So, she calls Hayeju. The white-haired warrior picks up, feeling excited and relieved that Jaewook is safe. While she's distracted by the phone call, someone quietly opens his status window to upgrade his magic pearl. After the call, Jaewook reveals that she just asked T to connect her with someone to whom she can sell the info. But she knows that the only big shots that will buy such stuff are the military and police like Seo and Kwan. Later, we see Hayeju bringing someone before the officers. For some reason, Hwan asks if the guy should be present when they're discussing. But that's when the slightly tipsy commander reveals that he was the one who called for the kit. He claims that the Amagi is an outstanding force of theirs, and it's already bad enough that Hayeju has to watch him round the clock. So he believes that it would be better for them to utilize all of the city's forces at a time like this. Hearing this, the big detective is upset, so he tries to kick against the idea of bringing the crazy dog to join them. But while he's still talking, an older officer sitting beside him named Lee Cholman calmly suggests that they just listen to the plan for now. The commander reads the information that Hayeju got from Jaewook and confirms that it's true. He believes that they can kill the god of gold before it can become an adult. He admits that there's still the diabolical difficulty of getting through Choi Yul, but he still feels that it's worth a shot. It's for this reason that the commander wants the Amugi to fight alongside them. And when someone hears this, he just teases the officers, claiming that the city needs him after all. So he suggests that they make a deal. Meanwhile, Choi and Swordmaster Jack are playing a game while sitting in the desert. The goblin asks Choi if they don't need to increase the sacrifices of sovereignty, pointing out how the Demon King's punishments might continue. In response, Choi says no, revealing that the largest number of citizens need to earn rewards. This time he said to the people that he would sacrifice those who entered dangerous dungeons or those who are headed towards treasures. He claims that they were all people that he needed to isolate even before the mission. But the goblin doesn't understand. All of a sudden, Choi informs his green companion that they have guests. And we see Hayeju, Kwan, and the detectives driving an army truck toward them. Kwan alerts all the other soldiers driving behind and tells them to prepare to fight since they've arrived at their target destination. Choi sees them coming and just tells Jack not to attack yet. He reveals that from old times, the last stage should always require sending the weakest out first. Emperor Griffin charges at the trucks to attack the visitors. Hayeju tries to fight it, but then all of a sudden, someone uses his power to throw her and Seo out of the truck, telling them to go forth as his bait. They surely didn't expect him to do that. And even though Seo has confirmed that Amugi is just crazy, he and Hayeju quickly team up to blast Emperor Griffin. Kwan, on the other hand, instructs his men to leave the vehicles and take cover so they can commence supporting strike afterward. While the soldiers try to assist Hayeju and Seo, Amugi just chills inside one of the buildings, feeling that he shouldn't fight yet since it's not the final opponent. Someone plans to betray the others who thought he could help them take Choi's gold. Because it turns out that he plans to use them instead. The commander watches the massive fight from afar and is disappointed to see that their initial plan of negotiation isn't going to work. So he gets into one of the other military trucks parked behind him and orders his men to move out and join the fight. It's at this point that we learn that the plan to kill Choi's god of gold was fake. They would win the mission immediately if they successfully do that. But they all knew that it would be impossible. So the real reason for this mission is to find treasure from the monster-ridden desert to the finally uncharted sector on the map. After calculating the little time left for the mission, the people decided that they needed to go in with full force at once and gather as much treasure as possible. Rather than going back and forth several times, as such, they needed to deploy as many people as possible for the expedition. Even though it meant facing hundreds of monsters because they needed their strongest men out for such a mission, they knew they couldn't leave the destructive Amugi alone and unopposed in the city. That was why they used the fake plan of killing Choi's god of gold to trick someone into following them out. Soon enough, they arrive at the final sector. And when the commander comes out, he's shocked and bewildered to see that the original world's Earth city is there. Looks like the mob is after Choi, and it remains to be seen how he will manage to slither away while also ensuring that the citizens get the rewards they deserve.